I'm a police officer who works in a major city in Australia. I'd rather not say which one. This whole experience started this past Monday, when I was working my station's front desk. Our command is in a pretty rough area, so even around lunchtime on a weekday, the place is packed. Most of the people in the lobby were there to report on bail, and that demographic tends to look how you would imagine. But there was one woman who stood out among the rest. It wasn't just her lack of face tattoos, it was because she appeared to be very nervous. When it got to her turn, the first thing she said was, "I might need to talk to a detective." That's usually a pretty good icebreaker in this profession, and my notebook was out right away. I explained that she could talk to me first, and that I would see what I could do. Cops over here are a bit less jumpy about people pulling black objects out of their bags than they are in the States. Let's not get political, I'm just stating facts. However, I was still surprised when the woman pulled out a VHS tape from her bag and slid it underneath the glass. It took a few minutes for me to get the full story out of her, because she seemed to go back and forth between being utterly horrified, then embarrassed, and kept apologizing for wasting police resources on what she said was probably nothing. Basically, she told me that a couple of months ago, she had been jogging around her area when she passed a whole bunch of furniture and personal items sitting by the sidewalk outside of a house. Judging by how much stuff there was, she assumed it was actually there waiting for a disposal company, and she decided to pick through it and saw a box with a VCR in it. She came back later in her car and took it home. She was going to check to see if it worked and try to flip it on eBay. It ended up sitting on her shelf for 2 months before she finally got around to testing it out. She bought a random tape from a thrift store, but when she tried to insert it, she discovered there was already a tape left inside. I thought it was stupid that she would run out and buy a tape without at least checking the VCR first. I took her into one of the interrogation rooms and had a staff member wheel in one of the TV carts. Some of our training videos for new recruits haven't been updated since the 1980s, and we still showed them on VHS. So we sat down and watched what was on the tape. It was labeled SEC Camera Club. It began with a woman tied to a chair inside of a room. The camera's POV walked around her before coming uncomfortably close to the woman's face. You could hear the camera operator panting heavily throughout the film. Soon, the tied-up woman began begging for her life. The woman who was sitting next to me in the interrogation room, whose name was Jennifer, asked if she could step out into the hall before the next part. I granted her request. What was depicted next still makes me feel sick just thinking about it. There's a chance it could have been fake, but by the way it was shot, and the terrified look on the tied-up woman's face, it seemed real to me in the moment. The cameraman pulled out a knife, and you can guess what happened next. The screams I heard on that tape still haunt me. I was shocked. I must have looked like an idiot because I had no idea what to tell her when I came back out into the hallway. In the end, I wheeled the TV into my sergeant's office, and he basically laughed in my face and said that this was all fake. He had been a cop for 13 years and had been to dozens of stabbings, and there was never that much blood. The cranky bastard then got pissed off at me that I had spent so much time watching a horror film when the lobby was still full of people. Even before the pandemic, the sergeant didn't like too many customers waiting around the station. I relayed what my sergeant told me to Jennifer. She was both relieved and embarrassed. I tried to give her the tape back, but she recoiled and told me to chuck it out for her. She didn't want it. I've been doing some independent research on what could have been on the tape. The only thing I can compare it to is a 1978 horror film called Faces of Death. It's a film that is presented as if it were an actual documentary, presenting the viewer with disturbing footage that depicts various ways of dying. The film is tame by today's standards, but was very shocking for its time because of the realistic nature of its presentation. Fair warning, if you love animals, do not look up that film. Now, to be clear, it wasn't a scene from Faces of Death, but I'm wondering if it's something from a similar production. Referring back to my notes from that day, the video was well lit, and the woman and the killer were wearing normal clothing. The walls of the room looked like corrugated iron, perhaps from a shed or maybe a barn. Has anyone ever heard of the SEC Camera Club? There were no serial numbers on the videotape, and my Google searches have failed to unearth any further information regarding this. I'm assuming it must have been from some underground bootlegging company that specialized in selling exploitation films. Or maybe it was a group of amateur filmmakers trying to make this look as real as possible. I'm just guessing here, and I know this is all very scant information to go off of. But if you know anything about this, please leave a comment below. I'm 19, and I live on a farm in a rural area with just my mom and older sister. There are no houses around us, just long stretches of fields and open land. Usually I go out back and do most of the work around the farm myself, while my mother handles the business side of things. My sister works in the city and has an office job. She usually gets home pretty late. One night I was outside fixing the porch light when my sister pulls into the driveway. Going by how late it was and the fact that she looked exhausted, I figured that she had had a tough day at work. But when I went inside the house, I found her talking to Mom in a low, hushed tone. I asked what happened, and my sister explained to me that there was a car following her on her way back home. This car had apparently been following her all week. She said that they would usually tailgate her for a short while and then turn away, but this time, they were tailing her almost the entire way. She took a bunch of wrong turns to lose them, which is why she was so late that night. My mom advised her to inform the police, and I supported that. My sister is capable and all, but she's also too friendly sometimes, and has frequently found herself in situations with creepy individuals. All of her ex-boyfriends have turned out to be assholes or stalkers. She's just too trusting of people at times. Unfortunately, she forgot to copy down the license plate number of the car, so she just gave the police a description of it. It was a light blue sedan, one of the older models. They told her to call it in if she noticed the car again, and that was all that could be done for now. A couple of days went by, and nothing happened. The car had apparently stopped following her. However, a package was delivered to our front doorstep. It wasn't something from UPS or the Postal Service. It was a shoebox. I saw it first when I was heading out to do work on the farm. I opened it to find a video cassette. I popped it into our old VCR. It turns out it was surveillance footage of the front of our house. It started when my sister left for work and stops when she returned home. There was a cut in between, otherwise it would have been over 8 hours of footage. I showed my sister when she woke up. She claimed that this was filmed the day before she called the police about the tailgater, going by the weather and the clothing she had on in the video. Obviously, we were all freaked out. She and my mom stayed inside, while I went out to check out the spot where the video had been recorded from. The vantage point was pretty far away from my house. I could only make a guess that it was from somewhere by the edge of the front pasture, but there was no trace of a camera or tripod. Since it was raining the day this video was recorded, any markings in the dirt or footprints had been washed away. We contacted the police again, and they asked her to bring in the tape. They said they couldn't do anything because there was no direct threat, only an implied one, and we also couldn't prove that it had been recorded on our property. The person who sent in this tape was clearly doing it to taunt us. As of the writing of this story, another tape showed up on our doorstep yesterday, depicting the same thing. I'm a female, and I was 20 years old when this happened. At the time, I was a junior in college. I transferred from a local community college to a university a few hours away. Due to a communication issue with the admissions office, I had a very short amount of time to find a living accommodation. I didn't know the area, and I had to resort to looking at Craigslist ads for a room to rent. Thankfully, I found a place near my school and met up with the guy who was renting out the room. It was a large house in a very nice neighborhood. The man's name was Peter. He was in his early 30s, worked mostly from home, and was very polite. Peter also rented out a room to another university student who was out of town until the semester began. When I eventually met the other roommate, he was mostly quiet and kept to himself for the most part. For my first week, I was completely alone in the house. Peter was out of town on a business trip, and the roommate had not returned from his parents' place yet. Not gonna lie, being alone in the house was a bit eerie. It was so large and mostly unfurnished, aside from a couch and a television set in the living room. There was a locked upstairs level that you could only access from an outdoor staircase that was directly outside of my bedroom. The house seemed to have several additions, so the layout was a bit odd. My bedroom was very spacious and had visible wiring throughout the room. The closet had a broken door that was propped up to the side. Peter told me that the previous owners had used it as an office. I checked out the wiring because it gave me a bad feeling, but I didn't find anything suspicious about them, mostly because I had no idea what to look for. Once Peter returned, I noticed a few odd things about him. He would say strange things to me that were vaguely sexual. He also liked to take pictures of me without my consent and post them to Facebook, usually tagging me in them. At first, the pictures were very mundane, such as me sitting on the couch or typing on my laptop at the kitchen table. He would turn the flash off, so I never knew when he was taking these photos, until I saw them online later. The pictures became more invasive over time. There was one of me in a towel when I was in the hallway walking from my bathroom to the bedroom. Another was of me tanning in the backyard. At the time, I didn't know he was home. I found Peter to be strange, and I was uncomfortable around him. But the room was a steal, and the location was good for my school. The other roommate shared a thermostat with me. It controlled my bedroom, his bedroom, and the hallway that led out to the living room. It was located in my bedroom, so I always left the door unlocked for him to change it if needed. One day, when Peter was out of town, the roommate was adjusting the thermostat when he noticed something strange behind one of the wires in my closet. He called me over to inspect it. It looked like a tiny black ball. I didn't know for sure, but it looked like it could be a small camera. So I put a piece of tape over it and considered calling Peter, but I didn't want to accuse him of something that I didn't know was true. So the roommate and I decided that we would ask him together when he returned from his trip. 2 nights later, I woke up from a deep sleep. I was disoriented, but I noticed my bedroom door was open, and someone was moving around inside my closet. I stayed very still and tried to make out who the figure was. As I mentioned, I thought it might have been my roommate adjusting the thermostat, but my eyes had not adapted to the darkness yet. But I could clearly see someone moving from the closet to the open door. The figure left, and I turned on the light to inspect my closet. I saw that the piece of tape that I had placed there 2 nights ago was now missing. I then opened my door and saw Peter walking down the hallway back to his bedroom. I quietly followed him, and after he opened his bedroom door, I confronted him, demanding to know what the hell he was doing in my bedroom in the middle of the night. He jumped when he saw me. He was obviously taken off guard. Behind him on his laptop computer was a grainy video feed of my bedroom. where I could clearly see that my bed was in the frame. Although Peter was a creepy man, he wasn't the confrontational type, and he immediately began apologizing and trying to explain that this wasn't what it looked like. Unfortunately, there was nothing I could do since it was his property, but I covered the camera back up and moved out as quickly as I could. I did file a police report, but I don't want to get into that too much since the case is technically still open, but I finally wanted to get this experience off my chest. I'm not sure how much footage Peter has of me, or if he's posted it somewhere online, or if he ever captured anything worthy of being posted, other than maybe a few nude shots. The other roommate moved out around the same time I did, and the last time I drove by that house was a few months ago, and there was a foreclosure sign in the front yard.
This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have one bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away, and this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. One time, I was home by myself and watching TV. I was very relaxed, sitting on the couch in the living room and just enjoying a movie. The volume was kind of loud on the TV, and I was having some popcorn. To that point, I had been home for several hours, and it was a good night. As the movie went on, I remember that there was a really quiet part. Just during that, I thought I heard the sound of something coming from the other room. It got my attention, and I was slightly concerned for a moment, until I realized it was probably just my cat. He was always moving around the house, so I didn't pay it much thought. Several minutes later, though, at another quiet spot in the movie, I heard the sound from the other room again. It just didn't really sound like my cat, but what else could it be? I looked around, and then I saw that my cat was sleeping on the living room floor in the same room as me. That made me realize that the sound I heard in the other room was not the cat. I got a bad feeling, wondering what it could be. I paused the movie and listened closely. When I did though, I stopped hearing anything for about a minute or two. Then I heard something again. It sounded like somebody was quietly walking through the kitchen, farther away. I couldn't see that area of the house from where I was. I stayed where I was on the couch, wondering if I should call the police or what. For several minutes though, I didn't hear anything more. So at that point, I was wondering if I had gone crazy or if a person was actually in my house. I hadn't heard anything in a while, so I decided to just go to my kitchen and look. When I walked over there, things were still quiet. Then, as I reached the end of the living room, I heard somebody walking again. Whoever was in my house quickly made their way to the basement door and then opened it. As I looked into the room, I just barely saw the door closing and then heard someone going down the stairs. This confirmed to me that an intruder was in my house and they were now going in my basement. I sprinted out of the room. Then I ran to the other staircase and went up to where my bedroom was. I locked myself in the room and then called the police from my cell phone. They said that they would send someone over right away and that it would be about 10 minutes. I felt better, but I would not be able to feel completely safe until the police were there and the person was out of my house. As I was in my bedroom waiting, after maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I heard the sound of someone walking on the main level of the house. I didn't know if this was the person leaving or what, but the fact that I was hearing them at all worried me. I hoped that they would have just stayed in the basement and the cops could find them there. Then I heard the footsteps reach the bottom of the staircase. Whoever was there then began walking up. Now I was really worried. They slowly walked up the stairs, and then it was like they made a beeline for my bedroom door. They went right up to it, and then tried opening the door, which thankfully had a lock on it. When this happened, I desperately wanted the police to get there now, but they weren't there yet. The person walked away from the door, and then back downstairs. I felt slightly better, but they still didn't leave. I heard them just walking around all over the main floor for several minutes, until at last the police arrived. The cops entered the house, and within seconds I heard multiple voices. After a while, when it was safe, I went downstairs. I saw that there were several officers there. They had found a man inside my house who I did not know. I was told that he was likely trying to rob my place. Luckily, he hadn't done any damage or anything. How he got inside of the house, I do not know. I'm really grateful that I came out of that situation all right. The scariest part to me is that the guy went up to my bedroom when I was in it.
I like to start off by saying that Christmas is my all-time favorite holiday. However, every year, I remember what happened to my family on Christmas of 2019. I was 12 years old at the time. That year we went to my cousin's house to celebrate Christmas. It was a very fun night, and we enjoyed each other's company. We decided to stay at my cousin's house for the night and leave early the next day. We settled down in the guest bedroom and soon fell asleep. Suddenly I woke up at 4 a.m., hearing noises coming from downstairs. Against my better judgment, I decided to go check it out. As quietly as I could, I crept down the stairs and looked through the wooden railings into the living room. I saw a figure that appeared to be dressed as Santa, looking under the Christmas tree. I went back upstairs and woke up my dad. "Hey Dad, Santa came back. He's downstairs." After my dad became fully awake, he seemed alarmed by what I said. We went downstairs to find no one inside the house. My dad told me that I might have just had a bad dream, and we went back to bed. The next morning, when everyone woke up and was getting ready to eat breakfast, my uncle went down to the basement to grab some drinks, when he noticed that one of the basement windows was completely shattered. After the initial shock, my dad and uncle checked the whole house to see if anything was missing or damaged. After they were done searching, they rejoined us in the kitchen. But before they could say anything, a loud crash came from the one place that wasn't checked: the attic. My dad and uncle immediately ran upstairs to check it out. A shouting match followed. We all ran outside and the police were called. When the cops arrived, The officers quickly ran inside the house. A short time later, they brought a man dressed as Santa outside. We later found out that the man had a large knife on him. The officer stated that it wasn't just my cousin's house that was broken into. There were multiple reports of break-ins up and down the block. Before I end this story, there was something that I overheard the cops saying that might be entirely unrelated to this break-in. Apparently they have been dealing with attempted kidnappings of young children at the local mall, with perpetrators dressed as Santa. This story happened in 2016. At the time I was living on my own in an apartment with my dog, finishing up college. That Christmas, my dad was only 350 miles or so away from me, 2 states away, as opposed to being over 2,000 miles away in my home state. So my mom flew in, and I drove in with my dog so we could spend Christmas together. The trip there in the first week was great. It was my first time living away from home, so it was nice to be with my parents again. However, the day before Christmas Eve, my mom found out that my dad was having an affair. And that kind of threw a wrench into things, needless to say. They fought all day into Christmas Eve. I got fed up quick, but I had driven there, so all I had to do was go in my car and drive back home. My parents were upset when they saw me repacking my car. It was now 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve, but I didn't really care. I'd rather spend my Christmas on the road than be in the middle of this drama. There was a lot of snow, but the weather had slowed down for the past few days, so I knew that the roads would be clear, and my car had 4-wheel drive. So I set off, and spent the first hour of my road trip just angrily venting everything to my dog. I filled up my car before I left, because I knew that the drive from my dad's apartment to my college town would be exactly 1 tank of gas. So whenever I needed to refill again, it would be in a familiar area. About 2 hours in, I wanted to give my dog a bathroom break to avoid any accidents in my car. That's when I pulled into a deserted rest stop to do just that. I hooked him up to his harness and made sure that I had my keys, phone, and my flashlight. I was cleaning up after him when I realized that he was doing these low, rumbling noises, the sound that dogs make when they see something, and he began kicking up snow with his hind legs. Now is probably a good time to inform you that I don't have a big scary dog. He's a barely 10-pound Yorkie. The Christmas sweater that my mom made for him didn't exactly help him look more intimidating. He may not be a guard dog, but he is a good motion sensor alarm. I looked up to see what he had been barking at, expecting it to be an animal, but it wasn't. There was a distinctly human figure in the distance. Had my dog not alerted me, I would have never noticed. There were not any other cars in this parking lot, and this place was fairly isolated. It was unnerving. I scooped up my dog and went back to my car. Normally when I picked him up, my dog would stop barking at whatever he sees, but that was not the case this time around. He kept squirming in my arms so he could look behind me, and was getting more and more worked up until he was almost clawing at me. When we got to my car, I finally looked back again, and this time, the figure was much closer, because he was full-on sprinting right at my car. I panicked and threw my dog into the passenger seat. I quickly got in and locked my doors. But of course, my car would not start. I had never had this problem before, but the engine was not wanting to turn over. My dog was now in the back seat scratching at the windows and was going insane, barking and growling. The man reached my car. He resembled any other homeless man I had ever seen, with layers of slightly torn jackets, some dirty jeans, with shaggy hair and a beard. He went from his sprint to a slow jog once he got into the parking lot. When he approached my car, he slammed his hands against the driver window.
"I need a ride."
He sounded out of breath, but very monotone. Sorry, no. I'm about to call a tow truck though. If you need a ride, you can get one from him." I knew that I looked and sounded scared. and the man started pounding on my window again with both fists. He said something about being cold and needing a ride into the city, and that it was Christmas Eve. But at this point I had stopped paying attention to him and was just focusing on trying to get my dog to calm down. He was still losing his mind in the back seat, still barking, growling, and scratching at the window. My dog has never before or since acted this way towards anybody. While he's not very fond of strangers or new people, he's always been the type to basically ignore strangers or any of their attempts to get his attention. So for him to be going crazy like this was a massive red flag for me. I held onto his harness to get him to relax, and I told the man that if he was cold, he could wait in the restroom for the tow truck to arrive. He motioned for me to roll down my window, and I shook my head no. I finally just put my hands over my dog's mouth, shushing him, and told the man that I couldn't help him. He looked angry, and then tried to open my door. Thankfully, it wouldn't budge, but it made my dog squirm out of my hands and went full-on ballistic again. I pulled out my phone to dial 911, and the second he realized what I was doing, he stepped back from my car and rushed into the bathrooms. Him leaving made my dog instantly lay down and relax. I explained to the dispatch what was going on. The lady was very nice, and she sent a police officer to the rest stop and agreed to stay on the phone with me until he arrived. The man came out of the restrooms and back towards my car. I began to panic again, but when he came close enough, I assumed that he could still hear me on the phone with the dispatch, and that made him run off in the direction he had originally come from. It took 15 minutes for the officer to find me. When we talked, we agreed that it was super expensive to get a tow truck out here on Christmas Eve, so I ended up deciding to call my parents to tell them that my car had broken down. My dad had a big pickup truck and was able to borrow a trailer from his coworker. The officer allowed my dog to sit in his cruiser to warm up while he looked around and followed the man's footprints for a while, but ultimately the man had vanished. My parents arrived around 2 hours later, and the officer helped my dad load the car up onto the trailer. I didn't plan on telling my parents anything more than my car had just broken down, but the officer filled them in about what happened anyway. Both of my parents then felt awful about everything, and they decided not to fight anymore, or at least in front of me. My dad was able to fix my car, but I think the entire situation really scared both him and my mom, because they ended up trading my car in for a new one the day after Christmas. They told me to consider it a late Christmas gift and an early graduation present, and my mom insisted on driving home with me when the holidays were over and flying out of my city instead. I never received any updates from the police if they ever saw or heard from that man again. Hopefully he's learned his lesson about harassing people at rest stops.
On Christmas Eve in 1989, I was traveling through Mexico City in my boyfriend's car. He was driving and I was navigating. There were Christmas decorations up along the streets and most of the traffic was moving at a snail's pace, taking care not to hit the dense pockets of people walking up and down the street. We were in a hurry though, so my boyfriend turned off one of the main roads and we cut down a side street to avoid the congestion. We made a few more turns and suddenly stopped when we realized we didn't have a clue where we were. I opened the map while my boyfriend put the car in park and lit up a cigarette. I was tracing our route on the map to backtrack us when something struck our car hard on the front side right next to me. I caught a glimpse of a figure slam into our windshield and bounce forward off the car. I cried out in shock while my boyfriend stuffed his cigarette in the ashtray and stepped out of the car. This is where the experience became strange. I've never shared this before with anyone other than my closest friends and family who I trust. While my boyfriend was climbing out of the car, I saw the figure who struck us stand up awkwardly, holding his head and limp across the street. My boyfriend completely ignored him and bent down to look at the front of the car. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey!" to the man as he limped away. My boyfriend, thinking I was yelling at him, called back to me, "Don't get out." I called back, "What? Why?" And my boyfriend stood back up and I noticed blood on his pants from where he had knelt down. "He's dead," my boyfriend said, and he rubbed his face. What? No, he's not. I turned and started to point in the direction the man had looked away in, but he was gone. I got out of the car and stood up. I saw enough to understand what my boyfriend meant. The man we had struck had flipped off the windshield and caught his head in a storm drain. His neck was very clearly broken and he was bleeding heavily from 2 different compound fractures in his legs where he had struck our car with his bike. The bike itself was lying on its side by my feet, the front wheel bent sideways and the back wheel still spinning. I was in shock and kept jerking my head back and forth down the street the man had limped down on and the figure at my feet. It didn't make sense. They were wearing the exact same clothes. How many people did we hit? I asked my boyfriend. He looked at me like I had hit my head. Only one, he replied. Then he started waving his arms to flag down a police car. I sat down on the sidewalk and stared at the ground, feeling like I was going to be sick. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't seen a ghost because I had seen the shadow of the man cast on the stone wall behind him as he stood up and limped away. But there he was. The exact same man who had stood up right there on the ground in front of our car. The police blocked off the area, examined the bike and our cracked windshield, and determined the guy had been speeding down the hill on his bike and struck us without applying the brakes. They asked me what I saw, and the best that I could do was stammer that it happened so fast. I thought we had hit 2 people. We got a ride from a family member to my boyfriend's house, but I was still in such a state of shock that I couldn't even touch the dinner that had been prepared for us. People have since asked if the man who stood up was bloody or if I could see the whites of his eyes. Honestly, I don't recall seeing either. All I could say with certainty is that he stood up, held his right hand to his head and limped away. He didn't react to my boyfriend stepping out of the car. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or life after death. But if that's the case, this man was physically reacting to the impact that had killed him, seeming not to have noticed that he was dead. Occasionally I dream about that night and that impact, but in the dream I never see the man stand back up. I see a bright flash of light and then nothing. No details of the man himself after the hit. I never even found out the man's name. It was the worst Christmas of my life.
My goal in writing this out isn't to have it shrugged off as just another entertaining online horror story. I sincerely want to know if this experience or anything similar has happened to anyone else. That may help me sleep better at night, knowing that it's not all just in my head. I'll admit that I suffer from PTSD, but this is so much different from anything else that I've ever experienced during one of my episodes. Last Christmas, my friends and I had planned to meet at our hunting cabin and have a rustic holiday detached from the rest of the world. We were planning on just lighting a fire, having some drinks, listening to some music, and playing some cards. I arrived at the cabin first, just as the sun was starting to set. The cabin was set alone on the top of a rocky slope overlooking the highway, so I turned on all the lights so it could be seen from the road. I got the fire going and threw the beer into the icebox to chill. It had snowed the night before, so after I warmed up the cabin, I went outside and shoveled some openings by the driveway for the cars to park in. The entire time I was outside, I had that feeling that I wasn't alone. Not necessarily that I was being watched, but that someone else was on the property. I shook it off as paranoia. Unless they were here for the cabin, there was no reason to be this far up the hill. There was nothing else around except for trees and power lines. I went back inside and noticed a couple of missed calls on my cell phone. My friends had called me to tell me that they were on their way, and that they would be there within the hour. I got the food going in the oven, and brought in some more firewood. I had been sitting down for about half a minute, putting my feet up when I heard knocking at the window. It was a harsh rapping, clearly someone that was trying to get my attention. I paused and looked up. The noise hadn't come from the window around front. It came from the back window near the kitchen sink. It was the exact opposite direction that someone should be approaching from. That side of the cabin faced the woods. I stood up slowly and walked over to the window and peered out, half expecting to see one of my friends pranking me, but there was no one at the window. I peered out across the small area behind the cabin, and I couldn't see any movement. I walked over to the back door and opened it, shining a flashlight out into the misty gloom. and by the trees, I noticed an outline of a figure. I called out, "Hey!" and took 4 steps out into the snow when I stopped. The crunching of the snow beneath my feet was as loud as fireworks, and I glanced down at the tracks I made leading away from the front door. Then I slowly turned the flashlight beam over to the spot beneath the kitchen window. There was no tracks at all. For about 10 seconds I just stood there, looking back and forth between the trees and the window. I then turned around and marched back inside, slamming the door behind me. I set the flashlight down, furious with myself, convinced I was having another episode, sensing danger where there was none, being distracted by stray shadows and sounds. I sat back down in the chair by the fire as another rapping sound came from the front door. I heaved a sigh of relief, presuming that some of my friends had arrived. I stood up and opened the door. There was nothing. None of my friends were at the door. No cars parked in the yard. No footprints in the snow. I felt a cold sensation sink into the pit of my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Someone was out there, taunting me, distracting me maybe, keeping my attention away from the other side of the house. I was suddenly convinced that someone was trying to break in. I grabbed my sidearm from my bag and picked up the flashlight again, and I searched both bedrooms, the bathroom, and the small closet where the water heater was kept, clearing any place where anyone could be hiding, making sure all the windows were locked. As I moved back into the living room, I glanced out the side window and saw the shadow of an adult man, maybe 5'7", cast itself across the front lawn by the glow of the porch light. I had him now. I flung open the front door and pointed my weapon. But again, there was nothing. No figure, not a whisper of movement, and no footprints in the snow. I held my ground. I wasn't crazy. That hadn't been the shadow of a tree. It had been a person. Head, neck, shoulders, and torso. I knew it had been. I scanned the yard with my flashlight, going over every inch. No footprints except for my own. The back door then slammed behind me. It didn't shutter. It didn't swing shut. It slammed. I spun around and nearly fired off a shot. I then sprinted to the back door, flung it open, and aimed, only to be greeted by the single set of footprints I had made before. I shut both doors and locked them, shut off all the lights until the place was only illuminated by the fire. I put my gun in the filing cabinet, locked it, then dropped the key in a jar. I sat there by the firelight for another 25 minutes, listening to pounding noises from various windows from across the cabin, forcing myself to ignore them and remain calm. I didn't catch a glimpse of any other shadows from outside, but I wasn't really looking. I saw the headlights of my friend's car pull in. I stood up, turned all the lights back on, and greeted them at the door, as if nothing was wrong. For the rest of the night I drank with my friends, and kept a smile on my face, not giving any indication that anything was wrong. We decorated a mini tree and played cards and had fun. That night I slept on the couch and ignored the sound of footsteps walking across the roof. Now I would have dismissed all of this as just being in my head, and I wouldn't have taken the time to write it down and share it with you if it wasn't for what happened the next morning. I was making coffee, and my buddy came back inside after having a morning cigarette. His wife calls out to him from the bedroom and asked him if he saw anything. I asked what they were talking about, and he replied, "We heard the sounds of footsteps on the roof last night, but there were no footprints up there through the snow."
The best story my grandfather ever told me happened back when he was 18 years old on Christmas Eve in 1959. He was lying on his couch with a broken leg, which was perched on the arm of the couch, all wrapped up in a cast. He was listening to the radio and watching the snow fall outside as he used the poker to adjust the wood in the fire. It was about 8 p.m. and he was alone in the house. His family lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and his father and brothers were across the property in the barn, roughly about a mile away. He doesn't recall where his mother was. He was reading something in the newspaper about President Eisenhower when there came a furious pounding at the door. An enraged voice screamed from the other side of the door that Owen, my great-grandfather, was going to die tonight. My grandfather didn't respond to this. Unable to move off the couch, he pulled the rug across the room until the shotgun which had been leaning against the fireplace was in reach, and he picked it up and cocked it, pointing it towards the front door. My grandfather says for the next 5 to 10 minutes, the man continued screaming, circling the house and pounding on windows, screaming for Owen to come out. He was clearly drunk and out of his mind and wasn't leaving the house until someone opened up. My grandfather winced as the man banged on the window right above the couch, but he still didn't move or acknowledge him. Finally, the man returned to the front door and pounded on it until he kicked it in. My grandfather said that he felt the blast of cold air and the stench of tobacco and whiskey as the man stomped through the dark hallway and walked right into the living room. He was a tall, lanky guy with brown teeth and an uneven gray beard, like he had only shaved part of his face. The guy's eyes were as big as hubcaps and he was barefoot, which was crazy as it was snowing outside. For about 10 seconds, the guy didn't even notice my grandfather, but was glancing around the room quickly, his eyes darting back and forth like a rat until his eyes fell upon the couch. He saw my grandfather, he saw the shotgun, and he froze like a deer in the headlights. My grandfather cocked the hammer back on one of the barrels. He had him dead to rights and the intruder knew it. My grandfather snapped. The man took a step back, looking more enraged than afraid.
"Where's Owen?"
he hissed.
"Get out!"
my grandfather yelled. The guy turned around, walked into the kitchen, and dug through the pantry until he found a pint of whiskey. He even turned around and looked back into the living room just to make sure the shotgun was still up. He threw back the whiskey, dropped the bottle in the sink, and walked out, calling back over his shoulder,
"Tell Owen I said Merry Christmas."
Once the guy was outside, my grandfather heard him knock over the pile of firewood by the steps. After another minute, he smelled smoke and realized the guy had set fire to the pile, likely intending to burn the house down. My grandfather hobbled over awkwardly, shotgun still up, barely able to hold it straight on his bad leg, and peered outside. The guy was gone, but there was so much snow around the fire and so much icy wind assaulting it that the fire was already nearly out. When Owen and the others got back and saw the charred marks on the front stairs, they asked what happened and my grandfather told them everything. Owen flew into a rage, took the shotgun, and followed the guy's tracks out across the fields with a lantern. He didn't come back until Christmas morning when the family was all gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. Owen tossed the gun down and hissed that the fucking thing hadn't even been loaded. When my grandfather asked if he got him, Owen nodded and responded,
"Oh yes."
And that was it. He never got my great-grandfather Owen to report exactly what happened or even know how he knew the man. My grandfather said that he never saw the stranger ever again. I asked him if he thought Owen had killed him and he responded, "I'm almost positive that he did." When I asked, "But how did he do it with no ammo in the gun?" my grandfather looked back at me and said, "There's dozens of ways to kill a man with your hands."
This didn't happen to me, but a close friend of mine. To avoid any confusion, I will write the story from his perspective. This happened several years ago when I was about 14. My family planned a weekend getaway to visit my uncle in Maine. We would stay in a cabin because my uncle's house was too small to accommodate everyone. We arrived at the cabin on a Thursday night and planned on staying until Sunday. It was Christmas Eve when we got there. I'll give you a brief layout of the cabin. It was a small, single-story ranch-style house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining room, an outdoor balcony, and 1 bathroom. We unpacked our belongings and settled in for the night. The next morning, we headed to my uncle's house and spent the entire day there. We helped prepare a Christmas dinner and had a small fire going outside. After a long day of celebration, we drove back to the cabin, extremely exhausted. I got washed up and ready for bed. However, once I exited the bathroom, I felt a dreadful sensation come over me, an uneasiness in the pit of my stomach. It felt as though something was in the cabin with us. As a side note, I'll mention that I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I cautiously made my way towards the dining room. When I entered, I looked towards the back of the room where the window was. The moonlight outside had bled into the room, casting a dim glow. When my eyes adjusted, I then saw a dark figure standing in the corner. A pair of red eyes stared into my soul with malicious intent. My next actions are inexplicable. I still have trouble understanding what happened to me when I go back to that night. But I calmly walked towards the bedroom and ignored whatever was hiding in the dining room. I still can't explain it. I should have been mortified, but it was almost like my brain went into autopilot. I eventually woke up at exactly 2:17 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. I could have passed it off as one of my parents grabbing a drink, but the footsteps were slow and deliberate, getting louder and louder as they approached my bedroom. My worst fears came true when I heard my bedroom door slowly creak open. I ducked under the covers, hoping that the thing would just leave. But my prayers fell on deaf ears as I felt something sit at the end of my bed. There then came a low, menacing growl. I quickly shot up like a firecracker had just gone off inside my pants. I caught a brief glimpse of a black silhouette with piercing red eyes sitting at the edge of my bed. I then bolted out of the door, screaming for my parents. After calming me down, they asked what the commotion was all about. I told them about the thing that I saw in my bedroom, but of course, there was nothing there now. I was baffled because I knew exactly what I saw. I'm not crazy. I know the difference between nightmares and reality. It's hard to explain the kind of fear you experience when you see something with your own two eyes that you know should not be there. My parents did the obligatory lecturing about having a nightmare and brushing off any possibility of a paranormal event. We continued our stay until Sunday and left for home. To this day, I have no idea what I saw in the cabin that night, and I will not be returning to find out.
I stumbled across the link on a Craigslist psych discussion forum. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just killing time scrolling through threads on lucid dreaming and conspiracies about subliminal messaging. And then I saw the post. Live feed, smiling man, watch if you dare. It had a single link, no description, and a sense of weirdness that kind of pulled me in, and against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The stream loaded quickly, revealing a man sitting in a plain wooden chair in the middle of an empty room, and the lighting was flat and harsh, giving the whole scene a very clinical vibe. He was staring directly at the camera, unblinking, with the kind of smile you'd expect from someone trying too hard in a family photo. It wasn't quite unsettling at first, it was just kind of strange, and I waited for him to do something. A wave, a twitch, a shift in his seat, anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, his wide eyes locked on the lens, his lips frozen in that eerie grin, and I checked the timestamp. It was live. I remember thinking, well, this is weird, while glancing at the chat window. It was empty, no viewers except for me, and curiosity kept me from watching. Now 5 minutes turned into 10, and then 20. He didn't move once. No blinking, no fidgeting, nothing. It was like he was frozen in time except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The longer I stared, the more unnatural it felt, as if he were daring me to keep looking. And then suddenly, I heard a noise. At first I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder, a faint creak like footsteps on old wood. But the man didn't react. The sound got louder, footsteps echoing faintly in the stream, coming from somewhere out of view. A shadow flickered across the far wall of the room and my stomach tightened. Someone was there. Someone else. I leaned closer to the screen and my pulse was quickening. A figure appeared, blurry at first, and then cleared as they moved cautiously into the frame. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, wearing a ski mask, and he was holding a sledgehammer. The intruder didn't seem to notice the live camera at first. He glanced around the room, gripping the hammer tightly, and then froze when his eyes landed on the smiling man. But that man, He didn't move an inch. His grin didn't falter and his gaze didn't shift. The intruder hesitated, his posture stiffening. He took a step closer, waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face. Nothing. And then he whispered something, low enough that I couldn't make it out. The smiling man stayed silent, and he didn't even blink. The intruder backed away slowly, muttering to himself, and then turned and bolted out of the frame. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere off screen, and for a moment the room was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the camera. The man didn't so much as flinch. I closed the tab, but the image of his frozen, smiling face stayed with me long after. I never went back to that stream, but sometimes I wonder how many people have found it since, and who's really watching who. I remember being 8 years old and my dad bringing home our first home computer. I have very vivid memories of how excited he and my mom were and how Dad let me use MS Paint to get me accustomed to using the mouse. It seemed like a big deal to them, but it was like a positive thing, you know, something they were excited about. But then when we finally got hooked up to the internet, that was a big deal in a whole different kind of way. My dad treated the computer like it was a gift from the gods and the key to the 21st century, which I guess in many ways it was, kind of. But he treated the internet like it was a loaded gun. I later learned that an uncle had warned my mom about how the internet was full of very dark stuff that had warped my young mind. And while I'd say that that statement had a whiff of hyperbole about it, I can't say it's completely false either. Maybe 6 or 7 years later, when I was finally allowed to surf the internet unsupervised, I discovered a little website you may know as Craigslist. I'm sure like 90% of people know what Craigslist is, and if you don't, you better just Google it or something, but I wasn't revisiting the place for the sales or the personals. I was returning for all the weird info dumps and discussions taking place in the psych and religion sections of the discussion boards. And that's when I discovered the single most disturbing thing I had ever read online. The story of a little girl named Anna, and how even though I thought my uncle was an old prude, making mountains out of molehills, he was actually kind of right about the whole internet being full of weird and very disturbing stuff. So back in 2007, a young Czech man set up one of those video baby monitors in order to check up on his newborn son. But then one night, he switches it on, and instead of seeing his kid asleep in his crib, he sees a boy of around 6 or 7 bound and gagged in the corner of a dirty cellar. Naturally, the guy rushes to call the cops, who deduce that he somehow received the signal of a similarly video-based baby monitor located in a nearby home. The cops then go door to door, trying to figure out where the signal was coming from, and that's when they meet the Morova sisters. The older of the two sisters was the single mother of 2 young boys and had recently adopted a 13-year-old girl named Anna. It was one of those 2 boys the young father had witnessed tied up in the basement. It was a form of punishment, but not one devised by the boy's mother or aunt. It was little Anna's idea, the 13-year-old girl adopted by the older Morova sister. But Anna had not just been manipulating the sisters into brutally punishing the boy. She had been cutting off thin slices of his flesh and then feeding them to the unwitting sisters in their daily meals. And at first, the police believed Anna was just another victim of the sisters' abuse. Yet oddly, the girls didn't show any of the same signs of abuse that the boys had, be it burns, bruises, or scars. The 2 boys confirmed it too, only they were ever subjected to abuse and Anna remained untouched. Somehow, Anna had convinced the 2 boys that they deserved to be punished, which was why they never thought to fight back or otherwise defend themselves. The same was true for the 2 sisters. Somehow, Anna had convinced them that what they were doing was the right thing to do, and neither of them had a history of being abusive until little Anna had showed up on their doorstep. Little Anna was adopted, all right, but the Morova sisters hadn't visited an orphanage or contacted some kind of adoption agency. Little Anna had simply turned up on their doorstep one day and had never left. The cops do some digging on little Anna, trying to find out where she came from. Then, after months upon months of searching, this is what they discovered. 13-year-old Anna was not 13 years old. She wasn't even named Anna. She was actually in her early 30s. Her name was Barbara, and the only reason she could pass as a young girl was because she had some rare developmental disorder. The cops moved to arrest the woman only to find that she'd fled the country. But thanks to them being able to circulate recent photos of her, she was quickly tracked down and then brought back to the Czech Republic to face justice. It turns out she was in Poland, posing as a 14-year-old boy, and she'd already talked her way into the home of a young family who had, you guessed it, 2 young children. On the Craigslist discussion board, there were all kinds of rumors that Anna's birth parents were connected to some weird cult called the Grail Movement. But even as a teenager, I found the connection to be odd at best. The only thread that held them together was the idea that the movement's goal was to create a kind of meta-Christ, essentially a copy of Jesus with all the same preternatural powers. Supposedly, Anna was this meta-Christ, but then without the proper guidance, she turned rotten and used her powers for evil. The Grail Movement was a real thing, and a serious enough movement that the National Socialists went after them after they annexed Austria. But I think people just wanted to tag the two subjects together to make the whole thing into some vast, creepy conspiracy, when to me, the whole thing is just scary enough on its own. These days, I think back on it, on what my uncle said about the internet being full of weird, creepy stuff, and I think he's partially right. But it's not the internet that's packed with all of those strange, frightening things. It's the world outside of our windows. Real life. The world and the people in it. Those are the really scary things. All websites like Craigslist do is kind of act like a window, which allows all of us to see it, truly. Way back before I moved out of my parents' place, my little cousin spilled Mountain Dew all over my PlayStation and just totally fried the thing. A few hours later, I was scrolling my local Craigslist when, bingo, I see a PS3 for sale for $100. The post said it was in good condition, and the seller claimed that he needed the money urgently. It seemed too good to be true, but since it was the holidays and everywhere was mostly snowed in, I was bored out of my mind, and I was desperate. I texted the number listed, and the seller replied quickly, suggesting that we meet in the parking lot of the closed-down Kmart on the edge of town. He insisted on cash and stressed the need for a quick transaction because he didn't want to be sitting in his car freezing his butt off. I felt uneasy, and I told myself that I'd be careful. As long as I saw the PlayStation 3 before handing over the money, I figured I'd be fine. When I pulled into the lot, it was completely empty, aside from the dark car parked at the far end, and a man in a hoodie leaned against the driver's door. He raised a hand in acknowledgement as I approached, and then asked if I had the cash. His tone was casual, almost bored, so it didn't raise any red flags at all for me. I nodded, and then he motioned toward the backseat of his car, saying the PlayStation 3 was there and inviting me to check it out. I stepped out of my car, walked towards his, and then opened the back door. Inside was a box, but something was off. It wasn't sealed, and when I lifted the lid, it wasn't a PlayStation 3. Instead, it was an old, dusty console that looked like it hadn't worked in years. And before I could react, I sensed the guy stepping closer behind me. Then out of nowhere, he pulls a gun from his waistband and tells me to hand over the cash, or I'm dead. The whole time his voice was low and controlled, and he didn't sound remotely nervous. But I felt like I was about to piss my pants as I reached for the envelope in my pocket. As I turned to hand it over, I caught sight of another person in the driver's seat of his car, crouched low and watching very intently. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was a straight-up setup. And when that hit me, it hit me like a punch in the face. I had this gut feeling that they weren't about to let me leave and that the guy's next command was going to be for me to get into his car. Instead of just handing over the money and staying put, I tossed the envelope into the car then instinctually just bailed. I threw the cash in the hopes they'd be happy with their $100, but then, looking back on it, who robs someone for just $100? They didn't want the money. They wanted me. And from what they did next, I'm not sure if they cared if I was dead or alive. The first gunshot cracked the air behind me, and then the asphalt kicked up near my feet. I didn't waste a second. I dove from my car, fumbling with my door handle until a second shot followed, louder and sharper and shattering my rear window. I finally got the door closed, started the engine, and then just stomped on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. When I finally made it home, I locked all the doors and sat in the dark for hours, trying to shake off the shock. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of just how close I'd come to something far worse, a near miss that could have ended much differently. Back when I was younger, a little reckless, and eager to find love, I thought it'd be a great idea to check out the personals section on Craigslist. Most of the ads I saw were either blatantly fake or downright creepy, but after scrolling for a while, one caught my eye. It was very short and straightforward. Looking for something casual, just broke up with my boyfriend, don't want anything serious, message me if you're interested. Something about it seemed genuine and the attached photo sealed the deal. And this girl was gorgeous, like sort of way out of my league, so I decided that I'd send her a message. She replied almost immediately and things moved fast, really fast, and within a few exchanges she was sending provocative pictures. And I really couldn't believe my luck, but something felt off, like it was way too good to be true. Now half joking, I sent her a message, if this is real, send me a picture with my name written on a piece of paper. And to my shock, she did, and that was really all the proof I needed to know that she was real. We kept talking, and she told me that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a no-strings-attached hookup. Her ex had just moved out, and she wasn't ready for a relationship. She just wanted to have some fun. She then gave me her address and told me to come over. And to make sure everything was legit, I called her, and she answered on the first ring, and her voice was just as alluring as her photos. She said that she was at home, waiting for me. It all felt like a dream that I was going to wake up from at any second, but it wasn't. It was real. When I pulled up to that address, it was a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house looked normal, with a nearly trim lawn and a long driveway. I called her again to let her know that I was there. No answer. I tried again, and still nothing. I started to feel uneasy, but I was convincing myself that I was overthinking. Maybe she was just in the bathroom or had stepped away from her phone. Trying to shake off the nerves, I got out of the car and walked toward the house, and that's when I saw them. 2 men were standing in the window, staring me down as I walked up the driveway. They each looked extremely sketchy, like they'd stepped straight out of a police lineup, and one had a shaved head and a sort of scowl, while the other was very wiry, with tattoos covering his arms. And my blood immediately ran cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there, and without a second thought, I turned and sprinted back to my car. My heart pounded as I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sped off. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them chasing after me. When I finally got home, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, and maybe those guys had nothing to do with her. But deep down, I knew better. About an hour later, I got a text from the girl. "You're a loser," it read. "That was my boyfriend, and we were just messing with you." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and relief. So much for the ex part, right? And I tried to brush it off as some sick joke, and they probably got a kick out of scaring guys like me. It was messed up, sure, but at least I was okay, I guess. But a few days later, the local news told a much darker story. A man had answered a Craigslist ad in that same neighborhood, and when he showed up, 2 men ambushed him. They beat him, robbed him, and left him barely alive, and he ended up in the hospital fighting for his life. The police said it was a setup, and in the description of the house matched the one that I had been at, and a very cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim. If I hadn't noticed those guys in the window, I might not have made it out, and the thought haunted me for a while. These weren't just pranksters messing around. They were predators, willing to hurt someone for a quick payday. They lured me in with fake promises and a pretty face, and I'd almost fallen for it. Even now I can't shake the memory. The way those men stared at me, unblinking, as if I'd already been caught in their trap. And the relief that I felt when I drove away was replaced by a very sickening realization. I'd been extremely lucky. The man on the news wasn't so fortunate, and I can't help but wonder how many had fallen for that exact same trap. I met him through a Craigslist personals ad. His posts weren't anything fancy, just kind of awkward and sweet, and it said something like, looking for someone to grab a drink with, laugh a little, and see where it goes. And it caught my attention because it felt real. And we started swapping emails, and he came off as funny and kind, maybe a little rough around the edges, but not really in a bad way. Then, after a week of chatting, we agreed to meet up in person. The bar was crowded, but we found a quiet corner to sit and talk, and right away, I noticed that he had this natural charm about him. He was funnier and way more engaging in person than I expected. He made me laugh, and the way he listened and responded made it feel like he'd be a great listener and maybe at some point in the future, a very attentive boyfriend. And as the night went on, he suggested heading to a nearby pool hall so we could continue enjoying one another's company. And I thought, why not? I had driven, so I offered to take him there. At the pool hall, we played a few games and the conversation kept flowing. He'd made me laugh, so much so that I almost forgot that we'd only just met. And then suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table and he looked at the screen and his face sort of dropped and then everything changed. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I froze, not really sure what was coming. "I'm a convicted felon, and I just got out of prison." And my mind started spinning. I didn't even have time to process that before he said, "And I have a girlfriend. I live with her, but it's not serious. I'm just staying there until I get back on my feet." And I was completely blindsided. This man who had been charming and funny all evening had just thrown all of this at me like it was no big deal. Then he added one more thing. "She just texted me. She walked into the bar earlier and saw us together, and she knows I'm with you." In that moment, I knew the date was over. I wanted to get out of there, but I'd driven us, and I didn't feel right just leaving him stranded. I told him that I'd take him back to his car, but the vibe on the drive was completely tense and uncomfortable. And as we drove, the alcohol must have really hit him because he started crying. Just quiet tears at first, but then it turned into full-on sobbing. He kept apologizing over and over, saying how much he regretted everything, and I didn't know what to say. And then out of nowhere, he reached for the car door handle. And a panic rose up inside of me, and I yelled, "We're on the goddamn highway!" And he didn't seem to care. He was crying so hard, and it was like he wasn't even hearing me. And I hit the child locks as fast as I could. I yelled at him, trying to stay calm, but inside I was terrified. I didn't know what he was going to do next. The rest of the drive felt like it took forever, and he kept mumbling and crying, and I just focused on getting us back to the bar as fast as possible. When we finally got there, I let him out and watched him stumble to his car, and as soon as he was out of sight, I just drove away as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later I got a message from an unknown number. It was his girlfriend, and my stomach dropped. She sent pictures of her face, bruised and swollen with a split lip, and she told me he'd beaten her up after our date. She'd confronted him about seeing me, and that's how he reacted, and I felt sick. This man who had made me laugh and seemed so sweet at first, was a violent monster. I couldn't believe that I'd spent an entire evening with him, laughing and having fun, all while being completely unaware of what he was capable of. His soon-to-be ex-girlfriend and I started talking more and more after that, and she told me all about the things he'd done to her, and it was horrifying. Then not long after, she left him for good, and we actually became friends. It's strange how something so terrible can lead to something good, but I guess that's life. And that night changed me. I learned to trust my gut and pay attention to those red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. And looking back, I can't believe how close I came to being another one of his victims, and it serves as a reminder to be careful and to never underestimate what someone is capable of.
A while ago, I got a job at a small hospital just out of town. I was excited as it was my first job I had been offered since my graduation. It was just casual work, but I was still ecstatic at the chance to work there, as the money was great, and it was the place I did my training at. Most of the time, I would do 12-hour shifts from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Sometimes I would work the late shift from 3 to 11. I never cared much for those. I was used to working late for my previous jobs, but I had to drive a lot further to get home. There was usually 4 nurses, 1 administrator, me, and the emergency doctor. That's it. Now, being in a small hospital like this one, you see some pretty strange things come in. Some people can't make it into the city, so we've had the emergency helicopter have to drop in every now and again. I've seen some pretty horrific things, like whole families dying from accidents on curved country roads. I've even had people bring in animals in desperation, as there was no veterinarian nearby that was open. This one particular night, around 10 p.m., I was sitting and talking with one of my nurses about a patient's chart, but I was mostly just wasting time until I got off at 11. The hospital was very quiet. I had only checked in 6 patients up to that point. I then heard a strange noise by the entrance. I then saw a man making his way toward us. He looked pretty normal, but he had on a long coat, which was strange as it was the middle of the summer, and even though it was dark, it was still very warm out. The nurse beside me let out a long sigh and got up to use the restroom, leaving me to deal with our new arrival. As he drew closer, the strange sound got louder, and something caught the light. He was dragging something behind him, but I couldn't make out what it was, although I assumed it was metal from the scraping sound it was making. It sent a shiver up my spine. He stopped at the desk, and I could see his eyes were wide, his pupils big, his face was pale, and it looked like he hadn't slept in a while. I had seen this look many times before, and immediately associated it with someone who was under the influence of something. He leaned on the desk and ran his fingers through his hair, pulling at it and grinding his teeth. When people like this come in, they are usually looking for drugs. Most of the time they will complain about migraines or fibromyalgia, anything we can't prove to the contrary. I processed him as usual and noticed he was becoming more and more irritable as time passed. Eventually, when I finished up, I pointed him toward the waiting area. He then asked how long it was going to be. Knowing that the on-call doctor had gone on a quick break, I estimated about half an hour. That's when his whole demeanor changed. The anger on his face was obvious as he stormed over to the waiting area, which is a room between the ER and the front desk. As he walked away, I caught a glimpse of what he was dragging behind him, and quickly came to the realization it was an axe. I panicked and almost called the code over the PA system, but I didn't want him to realize. I promptly called the police on my cell phone and ran down the hall to signal to the nurses we had an issue. The police would have to come from 2 towns over, which takes on average 20 minutes. Of course, as we were all pretty small girls, we didn't want to go near him. This man was tall and muscular. Even all of our forces combined, we wouldn't stand a chance. I calmly walked back to the front desk and paged the doctor, asking him to call me. I waited and waited, but I never got a response. I watched the man getting more agitated, and soon he began yelling and asking for help. I quickly hid from him. The other nurses and I devised a plan to lock him in the waiting area. The glass is reinforced and the doors are heavy, so it should have been able to hold him there until the police arrived. The plan went down without a hitch until the man realized what we had done. He started screaming and throwing chairs around the room. He then began using his axe on the door. We were all standing near the front desk and watching. I have never been so terrified in my life, and what made it even worse was the fact that he was making some headway on the door. It was around this time that the emergency doctor comes back from his break. He strolled through the front entrance, still sipping on a drink. When he saw all of us huddled by the front desk, he immediately took charge of the situation. After getting all the necessary information, he disappeared toward the back entrance, where the EMTs usually enter from. He then unlocked one of the waiting room doors, and then tackled the man when he wasn't looking. He bound the man's wrists together with cable ties and sat on his back until the police arrived. I was so grateful for having a young, physically fit doctor with us on that night. I bought him coffee every time our schedules crossed as a thank you, but I don't think that'll ever be enough. As this was the second incident I experienced while working the 3 to 11, I decided to never work late shifts again. I'm now on a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 schedule, and I feel much safer now. Last August, I was hospitalized in the voluntary psychiatric ward at the local hospital due to some major anxiety and depression issues I was having. It was unfortunately my second hospitalization, and this time I would have to have a roommate. No one knows why, but for some reason when the psychiatric unit was built, they decided to put in double rooms. Because of this, they would often have high-functioning patients share rooms. Since I was here about a month ago, when I showed up, the nurses all remembered me. Stays in the psychiatric unit average about 1 to 2 weeks. Because it's the voluntary unit, there's no actively psychotic or violent people here, usually. My roommate, Jane, seemed nice enough. She was an unassuming, petite woman. One thing she really enjoyed doing was sitting at her desk and work on crossword puzzles. In fact, that was the only thing she ever seemed to be doing. In the rooms, each patient gets a desk and a dresser, which are right next to each other. I was admitted to the hospital around 6 p.m. By 9:30, I had taken my medication and was doing some meditation before going to sleep. I was looking at this beautiful picture of a tree and fence that was mounted to the wall and focusing on it while slowing my breathing. That's when I saw that there was writing on it. I hadn't noticed it earlier. It was in pencil and was put into the picture with enough force to indent it. The writing said, "They are all liars. Liars." There were some other things I couldn't quite decipher. It creeped me out a bit, but I figure it had to have been the previous patient, so I went to the nurse's station to let them know. If you've ever been to a psychiatric ward, you'll know that most of the time, it's terribly boring. I spent most days walking around the unit. Some patients would actually count their laps. Apparently 30 laps equaled a mile. I also spent some time in the art room painting with a group. I began to notice that Jane never went to any of the groups. In fact, she never left the room. Then I realized that I had never seen her leaving the desk. Each time I came into our room, she would be sitting there, working on a crossword. I figured that's how she dealt with the boredom of this place. I tried to make small talk with her when I came in and out. I then realized something odd. The crossword puzzle she was working on never changed. It was the same exact one, with no progress being made. I would compare it to that scene from The Shining, where Mrs. Torrance discovers that all Jack had been writing for his screenplay was, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." It's quite a chilling way to discover that someone has gone off the deep end. The second night I came back in around 10:30 to go to sleep. She was still sitting at the desk, working on that same crossword puzzle with the lights on. I shrugged at it, because by this point she was no longer responding to me saying hello or asking if she was going to join the group. It was possible that she could have been having a reaction to some medication or just didn't feel like talking. So I turned off all my lights and pulled my privacy curtain closed. The medication I was on at the time basically knocked me out, so I was able to fall asleep pretty quickly. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to one of the medical assistants asking my roommate if she thought it was time to go to bed or turn off her light so that her roommate, referring to me, could sleep. She didn't really respond to the person and didn't turn off the light. I ended up just rolling back over and going to sleep. At some point she had turned off the light and gone to bed, because I woke up sometime later in complete darkness. I was confused. The medications I was taking would usually make me sleep for 12 hours straight. I then realized I could hear someone talking. It was Jane. She kept repeating, "Jesse, help me. Jesse, help me." I responded with, "Jane, are you okay?" She didn't reply to me, but she kept saying it over and over again, so I thought she may have been talking in her sleep. Eventually I dozed off again, only to wake up again at some point later. She was saying the same thing, only louder this time. I knew that she wasn't talking in her sleep this time. I tried to get her to respond to me, but she never acknowledged that I was even there. She just kept raising her voice. "Jesse, help me. I need help, Jesse." I got up and went to go get the night nurse, whose name was Jessie. I told her that my roommate was calling for her. By the time we got back into the room, Jane was hysterical. She was crying out for Jessie and trying to get out of bed. Jessie did her best to calm her down, and I was rattled. But I was given another sedation, and I ended up going back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, Jane wasn't in the room, and a table that had once been near her bed was now in front of the bathroom curtain. There were no doors because of self-harm risks. I went to use the bathroom, and there was an entire roll of toilet paper in the toilet bowl. Again, I went to go get a nurse, because I didn't want to be the one responsible for flooding the bathroom. I had already flooded a private bathroom by accident during my first stay. When I went out onto the floor, I realized two things. First, there was a medical assistant standing by the door near the front desk. Second, Jane was also standing at the door. The door only opens when someone phones in, so I was confused as to why there had to be someone essentially guarding the door. I found out from another patient who had insomnia that my roommate had spent the night running around the ward and throwing furniture around. They had finally gotten security down to talk to her, and she calmed down, but then stood in front of the door and was still standing there like a statue. 4 hours. I went about my usual routine of eating breakfast and painting. I asked some of the assistants about my roommate, and they tell me that she's been standing there since their shift started, 6 a.m. It's now 10:30 a.m. That made me a bit uneasy, but I just kept painting. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I look up and I see Jane outside of the room, staring in at me. She sees me look up and quickly looks away, but she doesn't move for a good 20 minutes. I get weirded out and decide to go back to my room for the first time that morning. She follows me into the room. I acted like I was just picking something up and leave again, and go to the assistant sitting at the front desk. I tell her politely that I might sound a bit paranoid, but that I think my roommate is following me around. So she lets me sit with her at the front desk. Because I'm sitting there with nothing to do, I decide to call my insurance company with a question. As I'm on the phone, Jane comes walking up with 2 plastic bins full of stuff. When they first let you into the unit, they give you a plastic bin full of various supplies. The bins were full of her stuff and my stuff. She also had the pillowcase off my bed that was full of my clothing. I lost it. Why does she have my stuff? That's my iPad. I kinda start freaking out. I do have anxiety issues myself. There were 3 nurses standing by, and they were flabbergasted. They had never seen anything like this. I'm now on the floor crying my eyes out, and someone kneels down and put their arm around me. It's going to be okay. You're gonna be fine. I had my eyes closed and I assumed it was a nurse, but in a bizarre twist, it was actually Jane. I tell her to stop touching me, and then tell the nurses I want her away from me. The nurses ended up bringing me into a private meeting room to go through my stuff. They then tell me that Jane is going to be transferred to the involuntary ward at some point during the day. Unfortunately, due to Jane's behavior, I can't return to my room until the transfer is complete. While this was all going on, Jane has now moved to the back door, which opens up into a stairwell that goes down to the garden outside. There's no way for her to open it, obviously, and she just stands there for hours. After a while, I just start ignoring her, though she stares at me whenever I'm in her line of vision. It was around 6 or 7 p.m. My husband had come to visit me, and we were playing cards with another patient who had just moved into our unit. We were sitting in the cafeteria, which was right next to where Jane was waiting, separated by a wall of windows. I believe that she had stood there on purpose so that she could keep an eye on me. As we were playing rummy, we see the psychiatrist come up with 2 security guards. She starts explaining to Jane that she has to go upstairs now. Jane gets agitated and refuses to move. A security guard goes to take her arm, and then she goes berserk, turning to one of the windows and starts banging on it, looking straight at me and screaming for me to come and help. They literally drag her kicking and screaming upstairs. I was a bit shaken up, but at least she was gone now. I end up with another roommate, also named Jane, but this new Jane was super sweet, and she was in the unit because she was detoxing from a medication. My attending psychiatrist assured me that my reaction was completely normal, and so I start to feel a lot better. The next day after lunch, it was time to visit the garden. I actually really enjoyed going outside. It's refreshing after spending so many hours cooped up in the ward. At the time, we were only allowed 30 minutes. I became anxious when I saw that Jane, my former roommate, was one of the people in the garden from the upstairs unit. So I asked one of the supervisors if I can sit near them during garden time. They say that's fine, and everything goes okay. Jane doesn't approach me at all. Now you might think that I'm being a bit dramatic, but Jane is one of those people who only appears to not be paying attention. However, it only appears that way. When we came back inside, since I didn't need an escort back to my unit, I made sure to break off from the group and get away from Jane as soon as possible. But then, Jane makes a beeline right for me, and she had to be restrained again. I didn't see her again after that. I think maybe the hospital staff realized that having her around me in any capacity was a bad idea. Something about me triggered her, and I don't like to think about what would have happened to me if she continued to be my roommate. This is a story that was told to me by my mother when I was old enough to understand what had almost happened to me. I was only a few weeks old at the time. In those days, when a mother had given birth and had taken their newborns home, midwives were sent from the hospital to check in on the baby and the mother once or twice a week. My dad was working, so he wasn't home, and my mother had put me to sleep and was going about her business in the house. 2 midwives had stopped by earlier that week, so she was confused when she heard a knock at the door. We lived in a very close-knit community where there was rarely any crime, but most people who lived there worked for most of the day, so it was basically deserted around this time. My mother was greeted by a male and a female who were both dressed in hospital uniforms with security badges. They politely asked if they could come in. They explained that they had been sent by the hospital. My mom let them in because they looked like professionals with the badges and uniforms. They even knew that she had a little girl and my mother's name. It was very convincing at the time, but that information was easy to access. The man said that he was going to take me upstairs to check on me, and the woman would look at my mom downstairs. However, my mother didn't feel okay about them wanting to separate us, and she explained that a pair of midwives had already been there that week and said that she was going to call the hospital as nobody had notified her that someone was coming just a day after. She also warned them that her husband, my father, was on his way home from work and wouldn't be happy about this unscheduled visit. At this point, the two got very defensive and said that they would leave after being really pushy with my mother to separate the two of us. After the back and forth, she finally got them to leave. They quickly changed their behavior to a more calm demeanor and said not to worry and that it must have been a mistake. What was even stranger, though, was that when my mom opened the door for them to leave, there was another person waiting in a car outside who still had the engine running. She called the hospital, and they told her they didn't have any midwives scheduled to visit her that day, and that they would always alert the mother if they were going to send one. They also mentioned that they would never ask to separate the mother and the baby. My mother gave them a description of the visitors, and they told her they didn't have any male midwives at that hospital, and that she should contact the police right away. Terrified, my mother called my dad, who came straight home from work, and they reported the incident to the police, but it never amounted to anything that we know of. Who knows what those two were planning to do? If they had gained access to all that information about my mother, they must have had someone watching the house and knew that my father wouldn't be home. And they had even gone through the effort of obtaining the uniforms and badges. Thank God my mom acted on her instincts and got them the hell out of the house. It's even more creepy to imagine what my life would be like now if they had gotten to carry out what they were planning to do that day. I don't believe this could have been a genuine mix-up. They had not followed the standard protocol, and no one told my mother they were visiting. And they were very rude and defensive when my mother challenged them, which is not acceptable behavior from a health professional. I believe we were very lucky they decided to leave. My mother couldn't have done anything if they decided to use force. I just hope they didn't do this to anyone else.
In autumn of 1995, when I was 5 years old, my parents moved us from suburban Dublin to a small town in a neighbouring county. Nowadays, that area would almost be considered suburban, but back then, it was the middle of nowhere, right before Ireland's economy started to really boom too. They bought a house that was about 2 kilometres from the village in a field surrounded on all sides by farmland, with a little cowshed directly touching the edge of our land. It had a long driveway up to the house, 3-bedroom 1900s dormer bungalow, and as a suburban kid, I hated the place as soon as we moved there. My parents were into their late 20s, early 30s at that time. They both had grown up in the city and wanted to experience country life, so it was an opportunity to do a renovation. And when we moved into the place, it was rancid. Nobody had lived in this house for decades, and I remember the water running yellow from the taps and the kitchen being non-existent when we moved in, and the heating wasn't installed yet. On our first Saturday there, I remember we watched what I think was Goldeneye. Could have been a trailer for it that I remember. I was only like 5, so it's a little bit fuzzy. We watched it though beside an electric heater with duvets around a tiny TV. What I'm trying to say is that it was bleak at first. As it moved into winter though, my parents were renovating room by room, and I experienced my first memorable snowstorm. Our electricity went out at one point, and I do remember my mum trying to keep me chill while she lit candles and stuff. And over time, things did eventually get better, and they renovated the upstairs room first. When you walked up the stairs, there was one big room that we all put our beds into that connected to an attic space, which I remember helping my dad put rat traps in and that sticky bug tape onto. Anyway, over time they renovated all the rooms in the house, and it turned out really nice in the end. It was very 90s, with loads of bright colours and a country kitchen and all that. But my mother was really depressed there, and this was a time before the internet took off, and in Ireland at that time, once you left the cities, you only had like 3 channels, and they were all Irish, which in 1995 was not a good thing. She just felt isolated, I guess, and I remember a few times she let me take the day off school and stay home even. I think that she did this because she was lonely though. Anyway, in August of 1996, they gave up and moved us back to the city. They bought a really nice brand new home right before house prices skyrocketed, and I even got to rejoin the class that I had spent a couple of months with in 1995. In 2011, when I was 21, my dad and I went for a drive together and decided to drive back to that town. And he started telling me stories about that house, and suddenly a bunch of experience that I'd had suddenly made a lot of sense. So, remember that big room upstairs? My whole life, I've had this sort of reoccurring dream where I'm lying in bed, my parents are downstairs with my family over, and as I close my eyes, I can see shadows moving in front of me between the hanging lights and the bed, as if someone is sort of walking back and forth in front of me. And I've had that dream maybe 20 times, I would guess. My dad told me that one of the major reasons they left was because they felt the place was actually haunted, apparently. This was obviously news to me, but my mum was already depressed being alone there while he commuted into the city every day. But that she also had experiences that made it very difficult for her to be alone by herself. But both of them had also experienced the shadows and the lights, apparently, and he told me that once she was brushing her teeth in the downstairs bathroom, it sort of felt a cold sensation, and then the back of her robe was pulled so hard that she dropped her toothbrush. But the bit that really freaked her out, apparently, was me talking to myself. My sister had been freaked out by this too. One night, and I remember this clear as day as well, my parents had friends over and I was playing in my bedroom, now downstairs, and I had an 80s arcade machine in my room that my dad had gotten somewhere. You didn't need to put change into it to make it work, but I remember very clearly that I was with a girl who wanted to know how it worked and stuff. And something happened, and she convinced me to get some change and try to force it in. I went to my mum and lied and told her that I needed £1 for the charity box school that they had given me. She gave it to me, and me and the girl tried to slot it in. My mum came in at one point, and she was really mad at me, because obviously I'd lied to her. I told her that the girl told me to, and my memory gets a bit foggy after that, but my dad in the car that night told me that there never was any girl, apparently, and that wasn't the first time that I'd seen her. The other time, I was playing in the front garden at the gate, and my dad noticed me talking to myself. He came over and told him. He came over, and apparently I told him I'm just talking to the girl. And I do remember him being like, okay, that's nice, and not making a sort of big deal about it again, that there was no girl. One time when they weren't looking and I was with her, she actually touched me for the first time. And this is the only time that I remember that I really thought as a kid that something was strange. She sort of touched my hand and then just immediately disappeared. I mean, I was 5 and I didn't know what had happened, but one minute she was there and the next she was gone, and I had this incredible need to take off the t-shirt that I was wearing. It felt like that feeling when you know that there's a spider on you or something. I ran up to the house though and into my room and pulled my clothes off, stomping on them. My mum noticed this too, but I really don't remember anything after that. Anyway, the old house, the smells of rotten eggs and the birds constantly flying into the windows were creepy enough without all of that too, but it apparently really sunk in with my dad when he was at the mechanics in town one day, making small talk, and one of the lads said, "You're brave living in that place," because apparently it had been abandoned for years and had been known locally as a very creepy spot that people would stop and look into on the country walks and stuff, wondering about it. When we eventually got back to it on our drive, the place was once again abandoned and being used solely for storage by whoever bought it, I think. It still looks creepy to today, and the travelers or gypsies who bought it have put a big religious shrine in front of the house. But there were also big sort of beech trees surrounding it, and it had a proper gate and all that, but 25 years haven't been kind to it, that's for sure.
My story isn't crazy long, but it's one of the wildest things that's ever happened to me. I still think about it now and how close I came to getting ripped off by people I thought were my friends, so here we go. It was a Friday night a few years back. I was supposed to go out with Ethan, Marcus, and a few other buddies. Just some bar hopping, nothing major. But that afternoon, I got hit with something nasty, fever, chills, full body sweats. My stomach twisted itself into knots, and the thought of even standing up, let alone drinking, made me want to puke on the spot. I shot Ethan a text and told him I'm out for the night. He hit me back with a laughing emoji, called me soft. I told him to have a drink for me and crashed on my couch with Netflix playing in the background. I must have dozed off because the next time I looked at my phone, it was well past midnight. My fever had eased up a little bit, but my body still felt wrung out. The TV flickered in the dark, some show playing I can't even remember putting on. I barely even had the energy to sit up, so I just let my eyes unfocus, sinking in and half out of sleep. And then I heard this metallic scrape. At first, I thought it was the TV, some weird sound effect, but when I turned the volume down, I heard it again. And this time, it was followed by whispering outside. My body went rigid, whispering. Low, hushed voices just outside my door. My mind quickly scrambled for some kind of explanation. Was it the neighbors or maybe drunk kids messing around? But then I heard that metallic scrape again, but it was longer this time, like something being dragged across my lock. My stomach quickly turned to ice. I slid off the couch, moving slowly and carefully. The TV cast just enough light to keep me from tripping as I crept towards the front room. I pressed my back against the wall near the window, took a deep breath, and then just barely peeked through the side of the curtain. Two men, dressed in dark clothes, both wearing ski masks. One was hunched over my front door, working at the lock with something thin and metallic, a lockpick. The other stood a few feet back, glancing around, shifting from foot to foot like he was really nervous. My throat locked up immediately. This ain't a prank. This is real. I stumbled back from the window and fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, voice steady and professional.
911, what's your emergency?
There's two guys outside my house. I swallowed hard. They're trying to break in.
Can you confirm your address, sir?
I gave it to her, whispering. My body felt electric, every nerve on edge.
Where are they in the house?
Front room. I can see them through the window. I don't think they know I'm home.
Stay quiet. Officers are en route.
I peered back through the curtain, breathing barely. The guy at the door continued to jiggle the knob, muttering something. I could just make out his voice now, rough and impatient. But at the same time, it was familiar. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I knew that voice. I told the dispatcher, barely even believing my own words. I think I know one of them. There was a pause on the other end.
You recognize him?
I mean, I can't see his face, but his voice, my mouth went dry. Yeah, I do.
Were you supposed to be out tonight, sir?
That question hit me like a slap. I blinked, my brain working slower than it probably should have been. Yeah, I whispered. I was supposed to be out tonight. The dispatcher's tone then sharpened.
It's not uncommon for burglars to plan jobs based on when they know somebody won't be home. You may have been targeted by somebody you know.
A cold weight then settled in my gut. I stared at the guy at the door, his build, his movements, the way he was shifting when he got frustrated. Every part of him was screaming something I didn't want to believe. Ethan. That realization made my skin crawl. My friend? A guy I was supposed to be out drinking with. He thought I wasn't home. He thought my house was empty. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me to stay on the line, but I wasn't listening. I hung up and called Ethan. Outside, I saw his phone light up in his pocket. He froze. The other guy just looked at him, confused. Ethan hesitated and stared at his phone for a second. Then, instead of answering, he sent it to voicemail. My stomach twisted and I called again. This time he didn't even check, just let it ring. I swallowed down the fear and that rage bubbling up underneath my skin. I typed out a text with shaking fingers. I'm home and I can see you. Ethan checked his phone and stared at the screen, and then bolted. I watched him and the other guy sprint down the street, their dark figures vanishing into the night. But they didn't make it far. The second they hit the driveway, red and blue lights flashed and sirens ripped out through the air. The cops were already here. The moment the sirens hit, Ethan and his accomplice skidded to a stop, and for a split second, they looked at one another, then bolted in opposite directions. It didn't matter though, the cops were already fanning out, voices barking commands. Hands where I can see them! Down on the ground now! Ethan hesitated just for a second, then dropped to his knees, hands in the air. His friend wasn't as smart. He made it halfway across my neighbor's yard before two officers tackled him hard into the grass. I stood there frozen at my window, watching it all unfold. It really didn't feel real. The same guy I shared drinks with, laughs with, confided in, was now cuffed, face down on the pavement. A few moments later, the officers knocked on my door. I let him in, and my legs were still feeling like they weren't attached to my body. I gave my statement and recounted everything that I saw. The whole time, my voice was distant, like I was telling somebody else's story. It turns out Ethan and his buddy weren't first-timers. They were tied to a string of break-ins across the town. Small stuff mostly, electronics, cash, anything that could flip quick. He'd been robbing houses for months and months now, including mine apparently. The reality of it all didn't hit me until after the cops left and my house was quiet again. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and then sat in the dark staring at my phone. I don't really know what I was waiting for. A follow-up for the police or my friends, really anything, but nobody reached out. I sat up for most of the night totally perplexed, half paranoid. It was a really weird feeling. I ended up just taking more cold and flu medicine and forced myself to pass back out. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself from some of the more sketchy friends I'd made over the years and got all the info I could on Ethan. He went away for a few months, maybe a year, but he's out and about again. He even tried apologizing to me, but I still don't talk to him. Folks like that definitely aren't worth the trouble. I didn't think twice about that night when it started. It was just one of those evenings, that same routine that I'd done 100 times before. I got off work early, one of those rare miracles that really didn't happen very often, but I didn't question it. Picked up Darcy from the babysitter, buckled her up into the car seat while she babbled along about the cool stuff that she did that day. The usual. The house was dark when I got home, the late autumn chill creeping in. Darcy clung to her stuffed rabbit as I carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind us. The house smelled like garbage, adding to the list of stuff I needed to get done. I flicked on the lights and set her down, and shrugged off my coat. I was just about to start dinner when my phone buzzed. "Hey, I'm gonna be late, at least another hour." Of course. I sighed, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. That left me alone with Darcy, longer than expected. I guess not a big deal, but I was already tired. I just needed to get the house together. "Okay, kiddo," I said, scooping her up. "Let's get you set up so mommy can get rolling." I plopped her in front of the living room with a sippy cup and her toys, turning on something animated to keep her occupied. She giggled, completely unaware that my energy was running on fumes. The kitchen was cold, even with the oven on. I moved throughout the motions, chopping vegetables and setting water to boil. That kind of mindless task that you do on autopilot. My phone buzzed again, another text from Tyler. As I typed out a reply, I heard something from the living room, this soft thump. I thought for a second, maybe I dropped a package of pork chops on the floor. No, they were still on the counter. Okay, well, maybe Darcy knocked something over, one of her toys. But then a few seconds later, I heard something else, something closer to a jingle. I turned my head, frowning. All right, something's off. I stood there for a moment, knife still in hand, trying to listen past the sound of boiling water. The house went back to quiet again. No thumps, no jingling. Maybe I imagined it. I shook my head and went back to chopping. Pulse just a little quicker now. Tyler texted me again. "I'm sorry, I'm ready to be home. What's for dinner?" I started typing back when another sound reached me. Not a thump this time, this kind of whoosh, like air moving where it shouldn't be. I turned my head towards the living room. A breeze? I could feel it now, drifting into the kitchen, sending a cold draft across the back of my neck. I dropped my phone. The front door was open, wide open. The next second was pure electric panic. My stomach flipped. I ran, nearly knocking over a chair. "Darcy?" My voice cracked as I burst into the living room. Empty. The sippy cup was on its side, dripping milk into the carpet. Her stuffed rabbit lay abandoned near the couch. The front door gaped open to the night, a dark mouth swallowing up my child. I ran to the threshold, heart slamming, eyes darting across the yard. The porch light wasn't even on. Pure black and no Darcy. My brain couldn't perceive or process it. One second she was there and the next, gone. I staggered out into the porch barefoot, cold slapping at my legs. I screamed her name into the night. "Darcy, baby, where are you?" No answer. I ran down the steps and scanned the yard, the driveway, the sidewalk. My pulse was roaring in my ears. Could she have gone toward the street, the backyard? My mind raced through every horrible possibility. And then I heard movement, a rustle from beneath the porch. I spun, breath sharp in my throat. I dropped to my hands and knees, peering through the lattice work. There she was. Darcy crouched against the foundation, wide-eyed and silent. Her tiny hands clutched her shirt, but she wasn't crying, just staring. "Baby," I gasped out. My voice was shaking. "Come here, come to mommy." She didn't move. I reached for her, trying to stay calm, but then I saw it, the thing in the shadows just a foot away from her. A skunk. Its black and white shape curled tight, tail raised, nose twitching as it watched me with these beady little eyes. The pulse slammed harder. Darcy was trapped. One move from getting sprayed, or even worse, bitten. My hands curled into fists, and I forced myself to breathe. Panic would not help. "Darcy, sweetheart," I whispered. "Don't move, okay? Just stay still." She just blinked at me, as if waiting for my next move. I twisted around, hearing footsteps, chest seizing up. It was Tyler jogging up the driveway, confusion written all over his face. Jesus, what the hell's going on? He panted out, and somehow I didn't hear him pull up to the house. I pointed under the porch. It's Darcy. She's stuck and there's a... The skunk shifted, and my breath caught. Don't startle it, I hissed to him. Tyler crouched beside me, peering into the darkness. Shit. Slowly, he straightened up and reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his keys. I didn't know what he was doing until he aimed, pressed the button, and set off the car alarm. That blaring sound shattered the quiet. The skunk flinched, and its tails flicked up and then gone. A streak of black and white shooting out from underneath the porch, vanishing into the bushes. Darcy then let out this startled little yelp, and that's all I needed. I lunged forward and grabbed her and yanked her in my arms, stumbling backwards into the grass. She clung to me, her tiny body trembling. I pressed my lips to her hair, whispering, "You scared me so bad, baby." My whole body felt like it had been hollowed out, shaking with the leftover adrenaline. Tyler bent down and checked her face and her arms. She okay? I nodded. I think so. Then that smell hit me, something burning. Tyler's eyes went wide. Dinner. I turned and stared through the open door, smoke curling from the kitchen. The pot on the stove, whatever I was cooking, was now in flames. We ran inside. Tyler grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink while I yanked that smoking pot off the burner. My hands were shaking so hard that I almost dropped it. Flames hissed and died as Tyler let out a blast of white foam, coating the stove, the counter, and half the floor. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. That smell of burned food filling up the house. For a second, nobody spoke. We just stood there panting, Darcy still clinging to my hip. And Tyler let out this short, breathless laugh. Whew. Hell of a night. I wanted to laugh too, but it didn't come. My body was still buzzing from the panic of losing Darcy, from that skunk, from nearly setting our house on fire. I turned and pressed my forehead to Darcy's soft curls, inhaling her scent, that baby shampoo and sweat. We need to check her, I murmured. Make sure she didn't get bitten. Tyler nodded and reached out to brush a hand over her back. No scratches, no blood. We still stripped her down and tossed her into the bath, just to be safe. She was sleepy now, the whole ordeal already fading in her little mind. By the time we got her dried off and into pajamas, she was nodding off in my arms. I sat with her in the rocking chair, staring out the window into the dark yard, my pulse finally slowing down. Tyler walked up behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. He's okay now. I nodded, but deep down I knew. Those 30 minutes were the longest, most terrifying of my entire life. And thank God Tyler just happened to get home a little earlier than expected. I never left that door unlocked again, I'll tell you that.
I've been hiking for a few years now, and one evening I went hiking on a trail I've done before, which I considered my favorite. It's well known for its beautiful views, and I had planned on a simple evening hike. I wasn't expecting it to take too long, so I didn't bring much, just water, a few snacks, and my phone. As the evening went on, the weather turned cooler. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and I knew it would be getting dark soon. I had planned to stick to the main path, but I decided to take a shortcut that would get me back to the car a little faster. I'd done it before without issue. This time though, the shortcut led me into unfamiliar terrain. The woods were denser here, daylight was fading quickly, and I had to have made a wrong turn or missed a turn at some point. At first, I didn't panic because I thought I could still find my way, but as I kept walking, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path was barely a trail now, just some faint markings in the dirt that I could barely follow. My phone had no signal, and when I tried calling for help, it just showed that dreaded no service message. It was already getting darker, and I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Right as it was getting dark, I saw an old shack up ahead of me. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years, but it also didn't look like it had fallen apart. The door was slightly open, and nobody was inside, so I decided to go in. It seemed like a strange thing to find out here, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I figured I could use it for shelter for the night until morning when I could see the woods better. The shack was small, with old wooden walls. There was some broken furniture, a dusty table, and a few old crates scattered around on the carpet that covered the ground. It wasn't much, but it was better than sitting outside in the dark. I locked the door behind me and settled into the corner with my bag as a pillow, lying on top of the carpet so that I had at least a little padding. Around midnight, I began hearing noises. It was faint, but there were noises now and then coming from below the shack. At first, I thought an animal had made its home under the shack, but as the night went on, I heard a lot of different noises, some louder scrapes, or just overall rustling around. I was confused, but tried to ignore the faint noises as I drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night. It all came together for me when suddenly I heard loud steps ascending towards me in the middle of the night. There was a lower level below me, like a bunker in the ground. As the steps worked their way towards me, I felt a slight push below. I realized I was laying right over the entrance to down below, which must have been a trap door below the carpet that I was laying on. I shouted out hello, kind of out of instinct, and didn't know what else to do. Whoever was below me trying to open the door frantically ran back down the stairs. A few moments later, I heard someone scrambling away into the woods, making a lot of noise as they went. I was a little worried that the person might come back, but I wasn't going to find the trail in the middle of the night, so I stayed. I spent the rest of the night huddled up in the shack, hoping that the morning would come soon. In the morning, before I left the shack, I tried to open the trap door below the carpet, but it was locked, and I couldn't find any other entrance to the bunker below me. There had to be another entrance because whoever was down there had taken off into the woods earlier that night from a different exit, but it was well hidden because I didn't see it. I made my way back to the hiking trail easily. It was easier to figure out where I was going in the daylight, and after a few hours, I was back at the parking lot. I immediately reported what I had found to the authorities, but when they asked for the details on the location, I couldn't give them an exact spot. The area was so far off the main trail, and I didn't really know where it was. I don't know if the authorities ever even looked for the shack and bunker, or if they ever found it. Maybe they didn't take me seriously, or figured it was nothing to worry about. To this day, though, I question myself why someone needed a hidden bunker below an old wooden shack in the middle of the woods for. It must have been some sort of extreme doomsday prep type of person, or someone who is up to no good. One of my last years at church camp when I was a teenager, I got a good scare and learned a good life lesson. I was 14, and my friend Tyler and I had snuck out of our cabin after lights out time. We didn't plan to go far, just a short walk around the campgrounds. We wanted to explore a little, talk about whatever was on our minds, and maybe see if we could scare each other. We were bored. We had spent the whole week at camp doing all the usual stuff like hiking, swimming, and the evening campfires. But that night, we felt like doing something different. We didn't realize how dumb it was until it was too late. We left our cabin quietly, trying not to wake anyone, and walked down the path towards the woods behind the camp. The camp was isolated with no houses for miles, no streetlights, just trees and a couple of small buildings scattered around. We knew the camp pretty well, but we had never tried to navigate it in the pitch dark. We wandered for what felt like a while, just talking and laughing in the dark. We figured we'd make it back before anyone noticed that we were gone. But when we turned around to head back, we realized the camp didn't look the same. The trail we had followed into the woods didn't seem familiar. The lights from the cabins were not where they should have been, and the shadows from the trees were deeper, like they were closing in. Tyler and I started walking faster, but it only made things worse. The more we tried to get back, the farther we seemed to get. The trail was different. It twisted and turned in ways we didn't remember. The trees looked bigger and the path narrower. It was like the woods were alive, shifting around us. We tried to retrace our steps, but it felt hopeless. By then, we were both nervous. Tyler kept insisting we'd get back, that we just needed to keep walking, but I wasn't so sure. My mind kept jumping to all the creepy stories we heard at campfires earlier in the week. You know, the usual scary stories about lost campers, strange sounds in the woods, and old legends nobody really believes but still makes you uneasy. After about an hour, we stopped. The woods were thick, and the moonlight barely cut through the branches. There was an eerie silence, like everything was holding its breath. That's when we heard something, a noise far off in the distance. It sounded like footsteps, with the crunching of leaves and twigs breaking. Someone was walking, but not in a normal way. It was like they were dragging their feet. We didn't say anything, but we both knew that we had to get out of there. We started walking again, only this time it was with a sense of urgency. It felt like we had to get back before whatever was back there caught up with us. Finally, we saw one of the camp cabin's lights, faint but visible through the trees. We moved towards it quickly, trying not to trip over roots or rocks in the dark. We finally broke through the trees and went back onto the main path, right in front of the main campfire area. By the time we got back to our cabin, we didn't say a word to anyone. Nobody knew we had been gone. I'm not sure what happened out there in the woods that night, but I know we both felt something wasn't right. It sounds fake, but it was the weirdest sensation ever. It felt like the woods were changing constantly, somehow trying to keep us trapped out there. The weirdest part of the whole night was that I had my watch out there with me, and according to my watch, we had been out there for at least an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. I wasn't sure the exact time we had left, but I know it was for sure over an hour. However, when we got back to our cabin and saw the clocks there, only half an hour had passed. After that, we never went exploring in the dark again at church camp.
When my boyfriend and I were both still in college, we rented out an Airbnb in Las Vegas during the summer. It was a modest 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house right by the Vegas Strip, making everything in walking distance. This one summer, just wanting to get away from life and away from it all, we booked the Airbnb wanting to have a nice time. The owner was nice, but was very strict on having people over. We assured him we didn't know anyone in Vegas and would honor his wishes. Our third night there, we had just gotten back from the casino after gambling some of our spending money. We've never been to Vegas, so it was okay to gamble at least once. A few hours after we got back to the Airbnb, I was feeling a little ill, so we decided to sleep in separate bedrooms to avoid the spread. However, the bed frame in the other bedroom was broken, so we agreed that I would sleep on the bed while my boyfriend slept on the floor with a simple blanket. I felt bad in the moment, but he didn't mind it though, and we fell asleep shortly after. A few hours go by when I was suddenly awoke to my boyfriend nudging me. He was standing over the bed, trying to wake me up. I take a look at my phone and ask him in an annoyed tone what was so important at 4 a.m. There was a short pause before he said he was hungry and that we should go down to the gas station for a snack. I told him that if he was hungry that he could go himself and to let me sleep. This doesn't satisfy him though. He didn't want to go alone and insisted I go with him. This was weird as I had never seen him act like this before. There was something about his tone that was just off-putting. At least, that was my logic. After several attempts of getting me to come with him, I finally obliged and put on my sandals. We walk outside of the house and start heading towards the street when my boyfriend says, "Babe, I'm not actually hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's someone sleeping there." My heart sank as he said this, and I repeatedly asked him questions to make sure he wasn't playing some sick joke. By some stupid luck, the person didn't see my boyfriend as they were facing the other way. We called the police, and lo and behold, they came out of the Airbnb with a homeless-looking man in handcuffs. However, he didn't try to get away and sort of just let the police arrest him. Looking back, it seemed as if he were wasted or on drugs. We still aren't sure how the man managed to sneak in the house, as the owner claims he had security cameras and would have definitely seen him. This makes us believe that this man had been inside the house for quite some time, even before us. And that's a very scary thing to think. It was the summer of 2016, and my friends and I were taking a road trip down to Miami for Ultra. Ultra is a widely popular music festival around the world that was hosted once a year with many popular celebrities. If you're a big music fan, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, my friends that I had gone with decided to get an Airbnb to stay in, as that would be the cheaper option than a hotel and was well within our budget. I've heard a lot of bizarre and creepy experiences when renting Airbnbs, but at the time we really didn't think much of it. We'd be at the event for the weekend, which meant that we'd also be renting the Airbnb for the whole time. It wasn't a huge house or anything, just the appropriate size for a group of friends. This had been a weekend we've all been looking forward to for about a year now, so we made the most of it. Fast forward to the day of the festival. We're all partying, having a good time, when I take notice of a man staring intently at my friend. This was common, as it's a large event with many people, so it was no surprise there were creeps. However, my friend didn't feel threatened or uncomfortable. She's had several encounters of people looking at her like this, and she sort of just let it go, as it was normal to her. We all sort of dismiss it as some harmless druggie and continue on with our night. The venue was huge with a lot of people, I'd say about 5,000, and after a night of drinking and dancing, we all had went home. It's around 1 a.m. and we're all starting to go to bed so we could get up early the next day. However, I have always had trouble sleeping throughout my life. I've always had an innate fear of the night, ever since I was a child, and for whatever reason, I guess it stuck with me through adulthood. I wasn't so much afraid of what lied in the dark, but rather the dark itself. I always saw it as some silly fear, but this night definitely confirmed my fears. At this point, it's about 2 a.m. and everyone was asleep but me. After constantly rolling around in bed, I finally got some shut-eye, when I awoke to my friend shaking me. In my groggy state, I ask her what she wanted when she says,
"Do you not hear that? Someone's walking around outside."
Now, my bed is right beside the back door, and after rubbing my eyes, I finally heard it. Someone was definitely out there, and it sure as hell wasn't any of us. At first, I would have assumed it was the owner of the home just checking on things. However, why would he be doing that in the middle of the night without us knowing? I get up from my bed and peek outside the window only to see no one there. I knew my mind definitely wasn't playing tricks on me, as I know what I heard. As I get out of bed to go see who it was, I then hear the scream of one of my other friends from another room. Upon rushing into her room, I opened the door and was greeted to a man who I could only recognize as the same man from the concert. The minute he saw me, he basically jumped outside the already open window and ran off into the night. Our two male friends had gone after him, but had given up after they couldn't find him. Police were involved, but there was nothing much they could do other than conducting a police report. We had contacted the actual owner of the house, who was thankfully very understanding and refunded our stay. Since we don't live in Miami, we had to end our trip short and head back home, which was an 8-hour drive. This was many years ago, and my friend has since gotten therapy because of this. She's obviously moved on from it now, but she still talks about it with people till this day. I still mourn over the fact that my friend could have been killed that night if she hadn't woken up. I still have no idea as to how that man from the show managed to find us. My only guess was that he simply followed us, but kept his distance while doing so. I've always wondered about what he might have done had I not gone into the room in time. We've never been back to Miami since, and we also don't rent Airbnbs anymore. This world is full of dangerous and evil people who actually want to cause harm to others. If you ever plan on renting Airbnbs, please do so carefully. Make sure all of the doors and windows are locked at night. You never know who might be lurking.
My brothers, my partner, my best friend and I all recently took a trip to Kansas City to go to the Orville Peck concert. We waited until the sort of last minute to reserve an Airbnb because we weren't all 100% sure who was all going. Nonetheless, we found one just outside of Kansas City, in a suburb called Grandview at a pretty reasonable rate. The host's overall rating was good, and we didn't see anything out of the ordinary when reading the first few reviews, so we thought we had gotten a fairly good deal. We arrived in Grandview a little after 3 p.m., and our Airbnb was the bottom floor of the owner's home. As we pulled up to the house, we noticed quite a bit of religious signs and statues on the lawn. Now don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with people believing in whatever they believe in, so long as it doesn't infringe upon other people's rights. But here we are, a group of very visibly queer folks about to attend a gay country concert, blindly walking into someone's home that we'd be staying in for the next 2 nights. We decided there was nothing to be worried about. And after all, we technically were in the Bible Belt, so we shouldn't be surprised that we're staying in the home of someone who is religious. My brother and partner called the host and met her at the door of our guest suite. She showed them around while the rest of us got our suitcases unloaded. When they came back to meet us, they said that she was super nice. And again, our minds were eased. We decided to hang out, order food, and rest a little before we headed off for the concert that night. Our comfort did not last long though. While we were getting our suitcases unpacked, laying around in one of the bedrooms of our guest suite, my youngest brother was casually looking through the drawers of the dressers and side tables, as anyone would do. Most of what he found was normal. Extra bed sheets, pens, paper tablets, nothing really out of the ordinary. That is, until he came across something that would completely change our outlook on the trip itself. Inside the drawer was a Bible, not super weird considering where we were staying, but he was flipping through the pages of it. A small tinfoil packet fell out. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about drugs or what they look like, what fell out of that Bible rhymes with smack star Sarowin. That's right, not even 30 minutes into our stay, my youngest brother found hard drugs in the folds of a Bible. At this point, we weren't really sure what to do. We did not want to tell the host, and we most certainly did not want to call the cops. We contemplated about taking the packet and throwing it away at some random gas station. But ultimately, we decided to put it back where we found it and act like none of us had seen it. We got our food and started to get ready for the concert. While the rest of us got ready, my partner, who was not going to the concert, started reading through the household handbook. Everything seemed pretty standard except a few lines that read something like, "We will respect your privacy so long as you respect ours. We can be available as you need us to be. And if you're interested in speaking about the ministries of God, feel free to reach out." Again, I have nothing against people following the religions that they do, but that seemed like an awfully out of place thing to put in your house rules handbook for your guest suite. There were a few more books lying around that stuck out a little off base with titles like Teaching Men to Comprehend How Women Think and How Women Should Think. We ignored these things for the most part, aside from my partner who is now freaked out about being left alone at the suite while the rest of us went off to the concert. I told him it was just some Bible thumping and that he really didn't have anything to worry about. He's a worrywart though. So as soon as we left, he locked himself in the bedroom and started looking a little more into the books that we had found. He came to the realization that the books were associated with the group called International House of Prayer, a prominent religious cult founded in Kansas City, a majority of whose members live in the Grandview suburb, where we were staying. I could write a whole separate post about the beliefs of those members, but essentially, they are an evangelical Christian group that has a functioning 24/7 prayer room that has been going non-stop since 1999. It's all too much to go over here. We got back from the concert really late, and not to mention a couple of us were still heavily intoxicated from drinking. So he didn't mention much about it that night, but he was very quick to tell us about it the next morning. At this point, we thought, okay, these people are part of some weird church, whatever, it's fine. That explains some of the weird rules and books we had found. We left for the day to go hang out around the city, and when we got back to rest, my friend and partner started doing some more reading on the group. That is when they found out that we were actually staying in one of the prominent leaders' houses. We figured this out by cross-referencing the names of our hosts with the names of important members on the International House of Prayer University website. After this, we started to snoop a little more in our suite. We found large barrels of dried food, a jug of some liquid that we later found out is what they drink while they fast, and lots more teaching materials. Basically, it seemed like they were completely prepared for some sort of end times rapture. Eventually, we did go back and read more thoroughly through some of the reviews, and found a few that would have set off some red flags. For example, one of the reviews stated how the male owner brought out a gun in front of the people who were staying there. Yikes. Not to mention, if there was even a hint of a negative review left, the host would leave a snarky reply. Needless to say, we spent as much of our time as possible away from that Airbnb as we could for the remainder of our trip. And although we were never in any direct danger, we did feel very uncomfortable throughout the entire thing. I've gotten a lot of questions about the heroin. First off, I know that it doesn't come back up in our story, but ultimately, it was the catalyst to all the other weird stuff that we slowly uncovered. And I knew it was heroin because I've seen it before. I have family and friends that have used it, and it is also one of the first things to come up if you Google drugs in foil packet. I do not know if it was left there by a previous guest or if it was the owners. Either way, finding it in a Bible within our first hour of being there was off-putting to say the very least. After reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved bad feeling that sort of lingers. Anyway, here goes. A group of friends and myself rented out a place on the week just for a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just for a big party. For the most part, that's exactly what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out, having a blast on the water, just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out, we decided it would just be a night of no drinking, maybe a little weed smoking, and just have a chill evening and night. And that's exactly what it was, very relaxed. So 9 p.m. rolls around, and about 8 of us were inside the house and 5 outside the house. It was a 2-story house with a 2nd-story deck / back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods, you would hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived, mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were so large, it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were upstairs on the back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside, just talking a little on this old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden, there was this weird feeling that encompassed us. Like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods down behind us. It was so strong we both kind of just quieted down, and then out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up. I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest though. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself anymore and darted towards the house with her following behind. It's hard to describe, and I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was definitely evil. Like something just so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the 2nd story and ran out onto the balcony with our other 3 friends, one of them being my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it too, and not just seconds later, the chanting began again. So the 5 of us are out there peering into the forest, listening to the chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language, or I don't even know what it was. Sounded like some strange extreme church. Then following the chanting, a loud bang, like someone hit a huge metal object sounded. And then, the worst part came. A man wailing, like in extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was up. It was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at one another in a mixture of scared, excitement, and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it that I wanted to call the cops, because whoever was screaming had definitely been in a lot of pain. And that mixed with the weird chanting just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing, and being weird. But no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync. Then the bang, then the wail of pain. And then, all that weird tension and energy was just gone. Nope. I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have. But honestly, the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods in the lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but close enough to hear all of it that perfectly. We all went inside and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go out and explore and find where the sound had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling ever. Whatever that was, it felt so wrong and so evil. I will never forget it. I can only imagine that it was some kind of weird cult stuff. A story on here reminded me of the time some friends and I had stayed in what turned out to be the third most shadiest hotel in Las Vegas, which for Las Vegas is definitely saying something. I also managed to inadvertently traumatize the entirety of my company, as I recounted what I considered to be just an amusing childhood story. The hotel itself was a bit of a nightmare, as everything was bolted down and none of the doors locked, but I digress. The story itself is about my family's run-in with Satanists on a trip to upstate New York. Though, the growing expressions of disbelief and horror on my companions' faces assured me that the story was not, as I had previously considered, funny per se. In any case, what follows is completely true, and everyone present swears by this narrative. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a little bit. There we were, in rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in, and a woman missing her 2 front teeth on both jaws answered. She invited us in, but warned us that they didn't have a room for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had vacancy just up the way, and she would give them a call. And she assured him that they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist and she wanted to show them his studio and his quote-unquote famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women missing their front teeth, bound, or being tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently most of the rooms were full to the ceiling with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people, with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were a little eccentric, and they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend, beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange that not only had they not met the husband, who was supposedly there somewhere, having toured the entire house, but there hadn't been a single sign of life or piece of luggage suggesting that anyone else was actually staying in any of these guest rooms in this supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but I've found strange when my mother brought it up while telling me the story later, was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us, and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, My mother claimed that one of us found and brought to her a small necklace with a pendant on it. The pendant itself was a pentagram on one side with a Third Reich symbol on the other. My mother took it away and put it inside her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also suspiciously missing her 2 front teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cult of Satanists or some such in this area. Great. She tended to tell a lot of tall tales, so I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it. But they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us, and we were all exhausted. And there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of moving our luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother and I into the house, saying she had some sweets, and wouldn't we like to meet her kitties? She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into the house because it was too messy, and she would be embarrassed. We were then herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the lady. Once inside, my father, who was by this time a bit creeped out, went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever, and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames, and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which were completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way, 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night. And just outside was a dark-colored van which had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors, and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this, we all started to settle down. This was around 11 p.m. The woman brought us freshly baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants in the area, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were fresh baked and smelled heavenly, and I wanted one more than anything else in the world. However, presuming, and probably correctly, that they were poisoned or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie. My mother absolutely forbid us from even going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was so angry. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, when at all, as you can imagine. They claimed they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke all of us up with a blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown. She was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled about for an hour trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she was walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was the picture hanging to one side of that door that during the daylight seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit in a tranquil forest scene, but by night was unmistakably burning corpses with a hooded smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early, and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came around back and gave my brother and I small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each a different color, and she had written little notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking gravel around the dirt absentmindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and waved to us with her gapped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that she was uncovered under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claimed it was the same pentagram with the Third Reich symbol within it that she had seen a similar version of in that park, prompting her to notice, as we drove away, that the necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to this story seemed appalled at the fact that I still have that little wooden cat that the nice lady had given me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events. And all the adults who were there tell the same story. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger actually happened that night. Update. According to my mom, whom I spoke with today, it was near Millbrook, and one was a farm and the other was an old mill. I actually found the website for the B&B. It's still running, but with different owners. I don't know that I should post a link, however. They seemed like nice people who have improved it quite a lot.
Last November, I turned off the highway into a 2-pump gas station in the middle of nowhere at around 1:30 in the morning. I guess I was kinda zonked from how tired I was because as I drove my car up to the pump, everything seemed as normal as could be. My eyes were locked on the pump display as I filled my car up, trying my best to not go a penny over $30, so it was only when I walked over to the kiosk to pay that I noticed something was off. The first thing that got my attention was how there was no one manning this kiosk. At first, I just waited, thinking the employee was just taking a quick bathroom break or something of that nature, but then as I started to look around, I realized the driver of the car at the pump in front of me was nowhere to be seen either. They weren't in their car, and they weren't inside the convenience store, so my first thought was how the driver and the gas station attendant must have been both in the back of the store, I guess. I got this momentary chill, thinking I might have interrupted a robbery or something, and I was suddenly very hesitant to knock on the glass or call for service. I remember turning to check out the car parked in front of me and thinking, if it's a Honda, then I'm getting out of here. But it looked to me like it was a 2011 3 Series. Now, if you don't know cars, Hondas are easy to steal. BMWs, on the other hand, not so much. And while that didn't completely preclude the possibility that there was a robbery in progress, it reassured me enough that I started knocking on the glass and asking if there was anyone there. I knocked once, and then twice, and then after the third time, I knocked on the glass in as many minutes, and it hit me that something highly unusual was clearly going on. My first thought was to try the door to the convenience store. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be locked, but when I pushed, the door swung right open for me. I walked up to the counter, calling out, "Hello?" the whole time. And then thinking there might have been some kind of medical emergency, I jumped the counter and took a look around the back of the store. There was a bathroom and a storage room and a small office, but all three were unlocked and empty. Then and only then did I realize that the entire gas station was completely deserted. I checked around the back just to be sure, but I figured that there'd be no one there. And then once I was 100% sure something seriously weird was going on, I pulled out my phone and got ready to dial 911. I wasn't still 100% sure what to do, so I called out hello again, but much louder. And when that got no response, I called the cops. I could tell that, at first anyway, that the dispatcher thought that I was just some jerk customer who was angry my gas station attendant wasn't there when I needed them. But once I properly explained that there was literally no one to be found anywhere on the premises or elsewhere, she started to take my call a little more seriously. She asked where I was, and when I told her, she asked if it looked like there had been a robbery. I remember asking, how the hell would I know? But she explained that if there had been a robbery recently, an employee might still be hiding somewhere. And I felt this sort of twinge of frustration because, like I said, I'd looked probably everywhere except the dumpster around the side of the gas station. And as I'm walking back from checking out the highway for signs of life, I just so happened to be passing it as the thought to open it popped into my head. I wanted to be able to say to the dispatcher, "There, I even checked the station's dumpster. There's definitely nobody here, ma'am." But when I opened the dumpster, there they were. I only caught a glimpse of what was inside before I dropped the lid of that dumpster and backed off like the thing was radioactive. But a glimpse was enough for me. There were two bodies in there, all bent out of shape with dark stains all over their clothes, and one of them was almost certainly wearing a gas station uniform. I remember saying something like, "Oh, Jesus, oh my God," pacing away from the dumpster in a state of total shock, with the dispatcher in my ear. Sir, tell me what's going on, sir." And I told her, "They're in the dumpster. Jesus fucking Christ, they're in the goddamn dumpster." The cops arrived in about 10 to 15 minutes, and by then I'd run off near to the highway to puke up all the contents of my stomach. And I'd remembered that thing about preserving the integrity of crime scenes, so in a wild panic, I'd actually puked as I was running, then had to hold puke in my mouth for a few seconds before I puked even more out near the highway. And after that, I just walked back and forth hitting my vape until I saw a cop car heading towards me down the highway, and then after talking to one of the officers for a few minutes, he told me I was free to leave. I looked the whole thing up online the first chance that I got later, but although I found a bunch of stories about a member of the public, yours truly, finding some bodies at a gas station, there was nothing that explained how or why those two people had been killed. And ever since, I've always been extra careful while driving at night, both in the sense that I keep a very close eye on my fuel gauge and try to avoid any nocturnal pit stops, but also, if a gas station looks a little too quiet, I'll avoid it altogether and just head to the next one. I used to work nights at a gas station called North Star Mart out near a place called Foster in rural Virginia. I used to drive up from Gloucester, get there at around 10 p.m., and then work all through the night until 6 a.m. when my boss, a dude named Judd, came over to relieve me. Judd lived right next door to the gas station in a big old house that he claimed that he built himself. There was no way that he built that whole thing on his own, but he was far too nice for me to call him out on it, so I just let it be. He was a great boss, too. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Not many folks can say that they had a boss who had done almost anything to keep them safe, but I can, and it makes me feel a little guilty sometimes that I don't head up there to visit him more. But I don't like driving around Foster anymore. I don't like going anywhere near the place, and by the end of this story, I think you're going to understand why. I worked at the North Star for 9 months and 3 weeks, working anything from 2 to 5 nights a week, depending on how busy I was at school. Not a single customer in all the time I worked there ever gave me a single ounce of trouble. It was one of the best jobs I ever had in that respect. It was always a little busier on weekends, but during weeknights, I'd sometimes serve only 2 or 3 customers a night and spend the rest of my time watching movies on my iPod, back when that was like a revolutionary thing to do. Judd was really chill like that. He didn't give me a bunch of cleaning tasks, and he didn't give me any busy work at all, actually. And he only ever had one rule. If anyone ever showed up late at night, acting weird in any way, I was to call him right away. It didn't matter if the call woke him and his wife up from the sweetest dreams they'd ever had. If anyone was acting sketch, Judd wanted to know about it. I figured that was fair enough. The gas station was Judd's whole life. It was his retirement plan, so if it went up in flames, well, you see where I'm going with this. So even though it felt slightly emasculating, as in I felt like I could take care of the station myself, I agreed to give Judd a call every time there was any disturbances. When he first told me about his little golden rule, I'd be lying if I said that it didn't make me a little nervous, I guess. It suggested that there were a lot of weird people who came by the gas station at night, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. Like I said, 9 whole months and not a single instance of weird or disturbing behavior. And then one night, it happened. I was in the back office one night, splitting my attention between security monitors and a copy of The Dark Knight Rises, when I suddenly saw a lone figure approaching the gas station. We had 3 cameras, one facing the pumps, one facing the approach to the store, and a third which allowed me to watch the inside of the store from the back office. I can see the guy walking towards the store, past the pumps, and then into the view of the second camera, but then instead of walking into the store like literally everybody else, he stops dead outside the door. He's right in the view of the second camera, so I'm looking at this guy fairly close up, and He looked like a perfectly regular rural Virginian dad type. He looked like he had work boots on, some faded jeans, and a baseball cap with some kind of hunting or fishing logo on it. Literally the most unremarkable looking guy that could ever walk through our door. But his behavior most definitely got my attention. I guess it's not entirely true that nothing weird ever happened, because there was one previous occasion where I called Judd in the middle of the night. Some crazy lady was screaming like a demon out near the pumps. It was a Saturday, and it had to be maybe 4 to 4:30 in the morning, but just like Judd said, I gave him a call at his house. I told him about the lady and how her screaming was freaking me out. He asked for a description, I gave him one, and then he tells me, "Oh, that's just Rhonda liquored up on payday. She'll head home once she's tired herself out." And then you know what? She did. She eventually stopped screaming and then just kind of walked off, like she was done with that night's performance. Anyway, the guy in the sporting goods cap stopped dead and just stood there in front of the camera, not moving a muscle. Not nearly as freaky as screaming like a banshee, but still weird nonetheless. I figured he was, I don't know, taking a moment to think or something. But then, as I'm watching him, his head starts slowly moving, turning his neck until he's staring into the camera lens. I know it was just an illusion, but it felt like he was staring directly at me, and that was easily one of the most unnerving sensations I've ever experienced. Once the guy's behavior reached a concerning level of weird, I grabbed the phone and called Judd. I didn't even feel emasculated doing it either. Whatever that guy's problem was, it wasn't meth. It was something way scarier than that. Judd picked up the phone, then once again he asked me to describe the person acting weird. I started describing the guy, and then the next thing, Judd slams the phone down. I look back at the screen and the guy's disappeared from view, but he's not in the store either, so I'm thinking, where the hell's he gone? But at the same time, I'm also thinking, why did Judd just slam that phone down on me? He told me to call him if something weird started to happen, and the first time he sounded sleepy but pretty calm, so I was wondering what was so different about that time, when I suddenly see him on the monitors. Judd was running towards the gas station in nothing but his boxer shorts and a wife beater, and he was carrying a shotgun in his hands. He burst into the store and asked me where he is. Then when I say the guy just disappeared, and that I think he just walked off, Judd runs past me into the office to check the monitors. I'm freaking out too, because what the hell is he carrying that shotgun for? But no matter how many times I asked him what's going on, he kept silencing me and telling me that I needed to concentrate as he ran back to the security footage to get a look at the guy's face. I watched him, rewinding the footage until he finally found what he was looking for, and when he did, I watched Judd turn completely pale. Whoever it was, Judd was terrified of him. So terrified that he felt the need to come running over with a shotgun to protect me, and then that scared the hell out of me too. Judd sent me home that night after calling the cops, and the next day he called to say that he'd understand if I didn't want to come back to work. I asked just one time if he could tell me who the man was, and Judd paused and then repeated the part about understanding if I didn't want to come back. I thanked him for the job, wished him luck, and then just hung up. Like I said earlier, I still feel guilty about not going up to see him more. He was a great guy and a great boss, but without knowing who that guy was, without knowing why Judd was so scared of him, I couldn't put myself in the position of working for him anymore. I didn't want to die for some stupid gas station job, no matter how cool my boss was. And if there was a guy out there who scared the hell out of one of the toughest sons of bitches I'd ever known, then what chance in hell did I have?
My mom used to work the night shift at a gas station in the early 90s. This is one of those mom and pop gas stations, so typically there was only about one person working the station at a time. During the night of the story, my mom's schedule had overlapped with one of her coworkers for 2 hours because there had apparently been an armed robbery in the same area the night before. So the owner was a bit concerned about being the next target of the robbers. After about 2 hours, my mom's coworker leaves. About a half hour later, there was a goth girl that comes into the station and buys a pack of cigarettes. The girl is fidgety but polite. My mom tells the girl to have a good night, then begins to clean the hot dog case. As my mom starts cleaning, she notices that the girl doesn't leave the station. The girl then starts walking around for about 5 minutes, just looking at random items on the shelves. My mom finally stops what she is doing, and she then asks the girl if she needs anything. The girl goes up to the counter and tells my mom that her car ran out of gas just up the street, so she needs to get some gas. The girl doesn't have a gas can, so my mom grabs one of the gas cans from behind the counter and then tells the girl the price of the can. The girl then says that she doesn't have enough money for the can. Mind you, she literally just bought a pack of cigarettes. My mom kind of wears her heart on her sleeve more than she wants to sometimes, so she tells the girl that she'll buy the gas can for her. The girl then smiles and thanks my mom. My mom lets the girl know that she doesn't have enough money to buy gas for herself, let alone for somebody else. The girl seems to accept this and then thanks my mom profusely. Goth girl says she has someone she can call who will stop by the station and give her some gas money. My mom then asks if she has enough change for the payphone, and the girl says yes. She thanked my mom yet again for the gas can, then leaves. My mom is really good at reading people, and while the goth girl seemed polite, there's something about the whole situation that was really giving my mom bad vibes. My mom looks at the surveillance footage that gives an outside view of the station. Instead of walking to the payphone, which is just left of the front door, the girl starts walking to a van that's parked really close to the station's exit. The girl then walks up to the passenger side of the van, and she starts talking to someone who's inside the van. She points a few times at the station while my mom is secretly praying she's not about to be robbed. The conversation between Goth Girl and whoever was in the van only lasts about a minute or two, and my mom just watches as the Goth Girl starts walking right back to the station. The Goth Girl comes back to the station and she tells my mom that she had got some gas money from her uncle, but that when she tried pumping gas, she had some trouble with the handle of the gas pump. Mind you, the gas pumps at the station are literally your basic no-thrills pumps. The girl then asks my mom if she could come outside and help her. My mom pretends to be calm, but she then starts to panic on the inside. She then tells the girl that she can't leave the station, so she asks the girl to try another pump. The girl says she tried them all, but she just can't figure out how they work. She asks again if my mom would come outside and just show her how one of the station's pumps work. My mom apologizes and she then explains that she's not able to leave the station unattended, or she'll be fired. She tells the girl that there's a gas station just a block up the street, and that they always have multiple employees on staff, so she should be able to get someone to help her over there. The girl starts to whine and she starts to let out this really eerie sort of snarl. She then gives the fakest big smile she can muster and tells my mom that she'll only be gone for a minute, and that she really needs my mom's help. Now, when she said that she really needed her help, her teeth were clenched and she started stomping up and down like a pouting toddler. Goth Girl then starts breathing excitedly like she's a rabid animal or something. At this point, my mom then drops all pretenses of being nice, gives the girl what she calls her cold bitch smile, and then says, "So, by the way, I saw you talking with your friends outside, and I already called the cops and gave them your friend's license plate number. They should be here in just a minute. They're so fast in this town." My mom was of course bluffing, and luckily for her, the girl seems to believe her. Goth Girl quickly leaves the store, gets inside the van, and right before she can fully shut the side door, the van is then peeling right out of the parking lot. My mom did wind up calling the police later on and then gave a general description of the van and girl. It didn't take too long for the police to find the van. It had apparently been abandoned on the side of the road near a wooded area. The girl and her friends had used hammers and box cutters to destroy the van's interior. The police didn't know what the girl and her friends had planned to do to my mom, but they said whatever it was, it probably wasn't even robbery. My mom wound up turning in her 2-week notice shortly after this happened. My mom's advice to anyone listening to this story is to always trust your gut instincts. They just might save your life one day.
So this was earlier this year. I moved to a different town and was finally settled into my new place. It was the night before Christmas and family was coming by early that morning, so I spent the evening cleaning and prepping for the next day. All was well, I was in high spirits and crawled into bed. It was the first time that I was hosting Christmas, so I was a bit too anxious and giddy to fall asleep. I knew that I should sleep soon, but I was just wide awake, so I played on my phone a bit and just passed the time. It was about maybe 10 p.m. or so. But then suddenly, I'm in the car with my husband on the highway and he's pointing at something in the sky, frantically yelling, "What is that?" And the next thing I know is that I'm groggy and waking up and there's lights around me and a dark shadow, and it feels like there's fingers pressing my temples and something is on my head. I vividly remember that feeling of dread and thinking, oh no, not again. I feel groggy but managed to mumble and lift my arm, which was heavy, and tried to say, "I'm awake." I then just closed my eyes and wanted it to be over with, and I remember thinking, I hope this doesn't last long. Suddenly there's blackness and I snap awake. I'm drenched in sweat. There are 2 points on my forehead that are throbbing in pain. I'm in my bedroom again and everything as I left it. The TV is on, my phone is in my hand, and I'm thinking, man, that was a weird dream. Suddenly there's a loud noise and the power shuts off, leaving me in the dark. It scared me half to death as well, and I jumped up and tried to wake my husband, who was dead asleep. Finally, after a few seconds though, the power was back on and my husband thinks that I'm just silly. The thing is that I understand that it could very much have been just a dream. That's not impossible, I suppose, but I'm not much of a dreamer, and if I do, they aren't that vivid. This one just felt so real, but why? And why aliens of all things? I'm mostly into like ghostly stories, so I don't read or look up UFO stuff that much, and I remember the physical feeling of dread that it was happening again, and I could feel my stomach drop, and I felt sick when I thought, not this again. But the strange thing is that I don't recall any other dreams or experiences like this. It's just so random. It was Christmas too, so I definitely wasn't thinking about aliens or anything. Anyway, I don't know what to think of any of this. I guess I'm just sharing it to get it off my chest and reaching out, I suppose. So, if you have any idea about what any of this could be, then please do let me know.